Before we start, I'll just say if you want to speak to any item or to public comment. Thank you. I will call to order the meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission for Wednesday, April 25th. Let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Ms. Navarez, can we have roll call, please?
Chair Longstreet.
Here.
Vice Chair Clark. Here. Commissioner Armbruster. Here. Commissioner Lesnar-Buxton. Here. Commissioner Martinez-Cohen. Here. Commissioner McGill. Here. Commissioner Perry.
Here. We're all here today. That's great. Ms. Zachary, do we have any changes to the agenda? Written communications?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, you received via email written communications related to items, so you also have hard copies.
Yes, thank you very much. Public comment. Any member of the public may address the Commission for up to 2 minutes on any subject within the jurisdiction of the Commission that is not scheduled for a public discussion before the Commission. The total amount of time for public comment will be 15 minutes, so everyone would have 2 minutes. I have not received any speaker slips for public comment. Anyone out there for public comment? Seeing no one, I will close public comment and we will go to the Youth Council report. Mr. Steady, welcome back.
Thank you. Madam Chair and members of the Commission, just a few quick updates on the Youth Council activities. This Saturday is our Teen Leadership Conference that we've been planning and preparing for about the last month and a half. We're in collaboration with the Police Activities League and Future Leaders of America, and there will be 2 general sessions, one on undocumented youth and presenting our findings from our ALMA project, and a second one on gun violence, and we have a special guest who is a mother of a Parkland shooting survivor who will actually be there and speak on that panel, so we're really excited about that. And there'll be additional sessions after our lunch. You are all invited. It's at the Davis Center on Victoria and Chapala. So,
and why don't you say the date and the time one more time?
Saturday, April 28th, and it begins at 9 a.m. for breakfast. And the sessions begin at 9:45, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
We are also currently still doing recruitment for the Youth Council, so applications are due May 1st. So if you know anyone or anyone that wants to apply, we're accepting high school and junior high applications. The Youth Council has also, as of yesterday, preliminarily joined a task force organized by the Coalition Against Gun Violence, with representatives from Hannah Beth Jackson's office, the county supervisors, and Mayor Murillo, and others to discuss and work on solutions for gun violence in our community. And as the Youth Council, we'll obviously be working on like the teen portion of that and how that relates to schools and the school districts. And then lastly, you should all be receiving formal invitations very soon to our 17th Annual Youth Leader Awards, which are scheduled for May 21st. I don't have a specific time for that right now. But I'm sure you'll get that in the invitation, and that is at the Carriage Museum. And that is all I have for Youth Council right now.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Steady? Thank you.
Thank you.
And the Youth Council for taking a leadership role in such important issues.
Yes, of course.
It's good to see. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, bye-bye. All right, that brings us to Commissioner Committee assignment reports. And let's start with Commissioner Perry.
You like starting at this end of the table.
I know. Well, I'm left dominant.
I was not able to attend the Arts and Crafts meeting this month, so I have nothing to report.
Okay.
I, too, was unable to attend the Golf Committee meeting this month, so I have nothing to report.
Okay.
Oh, we're not on to a good track record. I also was not able to attend last week's Creeks Advisory meeting, although out of the 2 agenda items, one of them was the 2019 fiscal year budget, which we'll hear more about later, so I don't think we'll miss out too much.
Okay. And Ms. Clark?
I attended the Street Tree Advisory Committee meeting where we discussed at great length the trees we'll be discussing later on today. I attended the site visit to the Chase Palm Park transition area between Chase Palm Park and the Waterfront Hotel, which is also on our agenda today. This morning, I had the pleasure of going to the open house at the Carousel building at Chase Palm Park and saw that what had the potential to be a forlorn remnant of a happier time transitioned to an affordable, hip, revenue-generating venue. I was thrilled to be there. And on the 21st, last Saturday, I attended State Trails Day at Hazazita Trail, where the city, county collaborated with Dave Everett and Santa Barbara Mountain Bike Trail volunteers to do some work on Hazazita Trail. I'm still sore, and that's it.
Thank you. Ms. McGill?
Okay, tough act to follow. The Park Foundation meeting for this month was canceled, so I didn't attend that. I did go to the Chase Palm Park site visit, which was really informative, and I look forward to that discussion, and also attended the Carousel Pavilion this morning. And aside from momentary confusion about whether or not there was a sit-down bar and breakfast at 9 o'clock in the morning, it was really great to see how that has been transformed. Thanks.
Mr. Lesnar Buxton?
I attended the youth council meeting this month. One of them, in addition to the comments by Mr. Steady, we also got an tour of the Franklin Center and their youth services and found out how they're planning to help fully revamp the teen center and the Franklin Center. Thank you.
Thank you. I attended the semi-annual chair and vice chair meeting that Parks and Recreation hosted this time, and it was interesting to hear from the other commissions in the city. Attended the Neighborhood Advisory Council meeting, also the site visit, and today's Carousel Carousel building preview, and really want to congratulate staff on a beautiful job renovating that building. I think it's going to be of great use to the community. It was hard to envision it as it stands today. So congratulations and kudos to everyone who worked so hard on that. All right, that brings us to Commission and Staff Communications. None, so we will go on to Employee Recognition Service Award pins. Ms. Zachary.
Chair Longstreet, members of the Commission, we have 3 employees that were recognized at Council this month. Enrique Alvarez, who's an irrigation systems technician for 20 years of service with the city. He worked first in parks, then moved over to golf, and then moved back to parks. So he's come full circle in his tenure so far with the city. And then we had 2 service awards that included a proclamation from the mayor. The first was for Santos Escobar, our parks manager, who received his proclamation and his 25-year pin with the city. Santos is an example of someone who's moved successfully through the ranks, starting out in grounds maintenance and now serving as the parks manager. And I believe, I want to say 10 years, a little over 10 years as the parks manager. So 11, thank you. 11, but served a variety of different roles. And as you recall, some of you who were around during the economic downturn, and we had to make some pretty serious decisions about how to keep moving forward with managing our park. Santos played a big role in that and keeping up morale, and we've rebuilt in a lot of ways, and so he gets credit for helping make that happen as well. And then for 30 years, Pete Whittington, our other irrigation systems technician, got a proclamation, 30 years of service to the city, and he actually had an uncle who worked on the beachfront. In fact, I think he was responsible for some of the first initial beach grooming that the city did. And I wish I had the old photographs from when there was actually a caretaker's house apparently across the street. So things have changed in Santa Barbara in 30 years, but luckily we have some great staff who've stayed with us for that length of time and brought their longevity forward. Thank you.
I saw both those presentations, and I was quite proud of the Parks and Recreation staff. And I would like to say to Santos here, thank you. All the things that you have done throughout the years, and especially things like IPM, which were tough to bring together, and you've led that effort for so long. When it had some impacts that had to be dealt with within the department, I just appreciate your leadership and thank you very much for everything you do. All right, we have now the summary of council actions. It was a busy month. Are there questions or would Ms. Zachary like to highlight anything in that report? Projects are moving forward. Summer camps are happening. It's good times. Okay, and now that brings us to the minutes for action. Any changes or adjustments to the minutes? No? Okay, I would entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Okay. I think we have two abstentions. We had two people that weren't here. Okay. Street Tree Advisory Committee. Here we go.
Chair Log Street and Commissioners, the first item is 1601 State Street, the El Prado Hotel. The project is proposing to relocate the lobby to face State Street. That requires the relocation of a driveway entrance, which necessitates the removal of one of the palms. And they will be having a passenger loading and unloading zone in front of the new lobby, which the desire is to not have a tree in an active area where passengers are unloading and loading their luggage and whatnot. So the committee reviewed the items. The original proposal was to relocate one of the trees and get rid of one. I had a conversation with the architect about that, and they are on board with relocating the second tree. The committee felt both trees were viable trees that could be relocated. If you look at your at the photograph here, this is one of the trees here, and this is the other tree that would be relocated. The committee recommends the commission approve the relocation of both trees.
Okay. Are there any questions of staff? We have some speakers to this item. No questions, and we would call Robert Richards.
Hello there. I'm the landscape architect, or one of the landscape architects working on the project. So I just want to say I support what's going on in terms of relocating the trees. You know, Tim and I reviewed the project, and it's just necessary to move the trees for the changes that are happening to the property. So we can work together to make it work. So hope you guys can approve it. And I'm here to answer any questions if you have any.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Any questions, comments, motions?
I'll make a motion that the commission agrees with staff recommendation to approve relocation of both trees to new locations.
Happy to second.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Thank you very much. That brings us to 4A2. This one will not be as quick. A little bit larger project.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, the next item is a Chase Palm Park transition area for the proposed waterfront hotel. The project is proposing to remove 54 trees, and I want to remind the Commission and the citizens out there in the municipal code, remove means to take a tree from its location by any means. So a number of these trees will be relocated, and I'll get into that in a minute. This is just kind of a concept of what the transition area would look like, and I can point out that this is the transition area adjacent to the hotel. This is park property that the hotel group is obligated to develop, and when they develop the hotel, and manage afterwards. And then part of the project is related to the street improvements on the Calle Cesar Chavez side. This plan shows a disposition of what's going to happen to the existing trees out there. The green symbols are trees that will be removed and replaced. The red symbols are trees that will be removed altogether. The blue symbols are trees that would be relocated from their current position to a new position. And the black or outlined ones are existing to remain. Just to go over some totals, in the transition area itself, there are 11 trees to remain in place, 37 to be removed, 23 to be relocated, 36 new planted trees are proposed. That would be a net increase in the transition area of 22 trees. For the area outside the transition area, in this area over here, they are proposing to relocate 6 of the trees from the existing transition area over to that area. And 9 trees would be relocated to other part. That would be these 9 trees here. The staff is proposing that we relocate those to a park to be determined in the future. We'll make that decision before the time to relocate them comes. And then 1 new tree would be planted outside the transition area. For Calle Cesar Chavez, they're proposing to leave 10 trees in place. 17 will be removed and 14 will be planted for a net decrease of 3 trees along Calle Cesar Chavez. The reasons for the removals, the majority of the trees in the transition area are being removed. If they're being removed and destroyed, they're in poor condition or not desirable trees. Other trees need to be removed or relocated due to grade changes that will occur, and some design reasons to relocate some of the trees as well. For Calle Cesar Chavez, there are 4 trees that, 5 trees, that will be removed due to site visibility issues. Those trees would be creating visibility issues for seeing the railroad track coming up, and the new crosswalk that's being proposed. We would have to be able to see pedestrians crossing in that walk, and the trees are just too close to those locations. The remainder of the trees will be replaced as demonstrated by these green trees. You have another item on your agenda for the street tree designation that will cover that item. So if you pay attention to number 11 here, right here in the corner, I'm going to switch to the next slide, and you kind of get an idea of how the trees will move within the property. That's the most visible one that you'll be able to see. So when the trees are relocated, the ones that will be relocated, this is where they'll be proposed to go. this tree here used to be here, so you can kind of get that transition of where they kind of moved to in the zone. So the Street Tree Advisory Committee reviewed the trees, determined that the reasonable development of the property is appropriate for the removal of the trees. Their recommendation is to approve the trees as proposed. Staff has an additional recommendation that the commission approve the removals on the condition that the 9 olives around the compass rose be boxed for relocation to a new park, that any trees not approved by the department to be planted in Chase Palm expansion outside of the transition area be boxed and transported to another city park, that all tree removals be contingent on the hotel construction and transition area development, that the department approval of all tree species to be planted within the transition area and Chase Palm Park get approved by the department, and that staff also recommends the commission provide comments on the transition area and Calle Cesar Chavez plans for those. And I think that might be the point where the other group would come up and talk about their portion.
I have quite a number of speaker slips, yes.
And Chair Longstreet and Commission, on your agenda, you also have the designation change. You may want to consider taking that as part of this item rather than taking this and then coming back to it later.
Yes,
So give you that
makes sense.
recommendation.
That would be item 4C, right? 4C.
4C3.
4C3. Okay. So we will also take information on 4C3 if you can.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
Are those all those staff recommendations that you just mentioned? Are those in
Right here, page 2.
Page
Right.
2. Okay, got it. Thank you. Just wanted to. You said a lot of things, and I was like, "Where is that?" There's quite a lot of papers going on up here. Thanks.
Okay.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, this item is for the street tree designation of Calle Cesar Chavez. The current designation is Magnolia Samuel Summer. There was a project that went in a couple of blocks up a few years ago, and at that time there was no designation. For that project, the Magnolia Samuel Summer was adopted and designated because it was more suitable to those farther inland sites. At this time, the Parker Group, the hotel group would like to replicate the existing trees that are along Calle Cesar Chavez with the designation of Samuel Summer. They could not plant the New Zealand Christmas trees. The project is proposing to remove and replace many of those in kind with healthier trees that are more centered into the new parkway. The new parkway will be expanded a bit, so these existing trees would be off center. They also are proposing to install Mexican blue palms in the median to enhance the median landscaping. The committee reviewed those trees and concurred that they would be suitable. Their recommendation is to add Metrosideros excelsa New Zealand Christmas tree and Mexican blue palm to the designations, the Mexican blue palm for the median only.
Okay. Thank you. Now we have a number of speaker slips. Ms. Elledge, did you want, is this all for you then? Oh, okay.
It's all for me, Madam
All
Chair.
for you.
Madam Chair and Commissioners.
Before we start your time, we have questions up here.
I'm sorry, Tim, is the Magnolia grandiflora the same thing as a summer? That one? I'm sorry. Our paperwork says a currently designated tree is Magnolia grandiflora, but that's indicating it's the Samuel Summer. Is that the same?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Clark, Samuel Summer is a variety of grandiflora, so it is also grandiflora.
Okay, you have 8 minutes, but we're not that. formal self.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Suzanne Elledge, and I'm with Suzanne Elledge Planning and Permitting Services. We're representing the Parker family with the hotel project and the work in the transition area. With me today are architect Bob Glazier with Glazier Lee and Puck Erickson and Bridget Walker from Arcadia. And we don't really have a lot to add with respect to the street trees. Tim did a great job of describing what's proposed and what we're doing. I think most of you, if not all of you, were on the site visit, so you were very familiar with it. What we did want to do, though, was take a few minutes to review the landscape plan of the transition area and the architecture that faces the both of the shared property boundaries, the southern boundary of the hotel, the northern boundary of transition area along Cabrillo, along with the western side of the hotel, east end of Chase Palm Park. So, having not had the pleasure very often of coming before your commission, we brought a few plan sheets on a thumb drive that we were hoping that we could plug into the computer, which would aid in our presentation if that's possible. Can we do that?
Yeah, I have no idea. Staff will help you with that if there's, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Yes. Thanks. And they're in the order that we need.
Are there questions that came up maybe at the meeting or anything that Ms. Elledge could answer at this point?
And if not, we could go ahead and begin the presentation and just hope that we get the plan sheets to, there we go. That wasn't so bad. Thank you so much.
Okay.
We could go ahead and begin. Just quickly, this project, as we mentioned at the site, is a revision to a project that was approved back in 2007, 2008. Construction actually commenced, and because of the economic downturn and other events, that work was suspended. And so the Parker family had the opportunity to rethink what was a 150-room hotel that had a 3-floor mass all along the perimeter of the site, along the park and along Cabrillo Boulevard, and significantly reduced the size of the project from what was 150 rooms down to, we're between 52 and 60 right now. And so it was a wonderful opportunity to come in with a project that I think is more in keeping with Santa Barbara, actually, and more appropriate for this site. So it looks like we've got some plans up there. So I'm going to turn this over to Bob Glazier, the architect. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bob Glazier. I've been on the project for about a year now, and as with all my projects, I like to review the history of the site. And as you may know, there's been many plans done for this site, and I think for me, the most important plan is the 1924 Cheney and Olmsted Brothers plan, which, if you know, required...
I'm going to ask you to go not too much into history, but to stick, our purview is just going to be the landscaping and this tree removals.
The reason I mentioned that report is that report calls for significant setbacks and landscaping around the building. So I just wanted to say that report is what guided us to set the building back in different areas around the site. Do you want me to talk about the setbacks and?
Yeah, a little bit.
Sorry.
I've seen you on ABR, and we don't do the whole 20-minute one. It's not our purview.
That's not possible. The reason I mentioned the Olmsted Brothers plan was that, again, it called for the keeping of all the mountain views. We want to make sure that we push the building back as much as possible, and we did not push the building up against all the setback lines. So starting along Cesar Chavez, obviously we have more organic edge instead of a straight edge along the street. Along the transition zone, we actually pulled it back more than we had to in certain areas to again increase the setbacks. We opened up the courtyard to the main view from Cabrillo Boulevard. And then over on the park side, which is why obviously we're here today, and of course the front side, if you can see the setbacks there, if you can see the property line, we are set back as much as 48 feet in the center, down to 24 feet average on the end, and the closest spot we're coming to that property line is 12 feet. So we wanted really significant setbacks along there. Not only setbacks in the plan, but also setbacks in the elevations. I think if we jump to the next, I'm I'm going to skip this now, given what you just said. But this is the Cesar Chavez plan and how we stepped it back. This is obviously an aerial view. Cabrillo Boulevard is in the foreground. The transition zone is in the foreground as well. As I mentioned, we really wanted to open that courtyard up to the landscaping along Cabrillo. And then you can see on the west side, of course, the park side, we not only wanted to step the building back from the property line, but also step it in elevation too. So we have stepping in the massing, we have stepping in the elevation. We actually have the top floor set back in certain areas. We really wanted to create a very nice organic edge to this, and again, not push it up directly to the property line. So I can keep talking, but if you want me to stop, I will.
Are there questions of the architect? Yes.
I think the when you were going to talk about the Olmsted plan and you didn't, but if you could talk about the cadence of the palms real quick, I really think it's relevant. And
It is. I think I should leave that to the landscape architect, if that's okay. Is that okay?
Okay. Are there questions of the architect? Okay. I think we all did do the site visit, so
Yes.
you know,
I'm sorry.
yeah, that's the good news. No, it's the good news.
These are better pictures, though.
Okay, so do we want to go more into the landscape and the placements?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.
My name is Puck Erickson from Arcadia Studio, and it's a lot warmer here than it was on our site visit. This is just a quick sheet that shows sketches which actually don't have all of the tree massing in front of the building from the transition zone. The upper one is from the south side, and you'll see that basically it's framed by the Monterey cypress, and then what you were speaking to, and I'm going to reuse that word, it's a great word, cadence of palm trees. We looked at the rhythm of the palm trees along Chase Palm Park and tried to replicate them as much as possible. So this really feels like it is a true eastern extension of the park rather than simply the front yard of the hotel. And that is one of the reasons that we are moving and adjusting some of the existing blue palms as well as the Washingtonia robustus. And then we're accenting that area on the south with some Phoenix reclinata and a collection of cycads and some chamaerops as well. So, and then the sort of middle ground is really framed by a collection of aloes. We're using a lot of aloe, sort of medium to large size aloes as part of that. And when you get to actually Cabrillo Boulevard itself, and I love your input on this if there's time, we're thinking about that as you're driving or walking along Cabrillo Boulevard, one of the things that you do get a sense of is this sort of flat green space of lawn and palms. And given our water resources, we want to kind of minimize the use of actual turf. So along the actual edge of Cabrillo, that sort of green area is where we're considering using a type of native low creeping ryegrass, a coastal ryegrass that John Greenlee's hybridized. We could go on forever about that. But anyway, it's low and green. And the other plant material we're thinking about incorporating is Carapia, which is another very flat, low green ground cover, which takes traffic and dogs and things like that as people walk along, because we want this area to be used, which is why we added that secondary path that breaks up that whole space. And then we're redoing, of course, the compass rose. I think we spoke to that. And then on the west side, is where we're really starting a sort of a collection of historical plant introductions in Santa Barbara, including those from Franceschi all the way up to some of our contemporaries like Randy Baldwin. So we're sort of going into the detail of that right now, and we'd be glad to continue to share it with the commission as needed, but obviously we're working really closely with the staff on the development of these details, and I'm sure they'll keep you apprised. Any other questions?
Yes, are there questions? My question is to clarify, all of this transition, this new planting area, is the area maintained by the hotel, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. Because it's, and I like what you're talking about in the front to make it a little less formal. One of the things about the front of the DoubleTree, or whatever it is now, I know it's changing again, is that it really, the area that's even the setback that's supposed to be public land looks like it belongs to the hotel. And it's important that with this being an access into the park, that it really look like the park and it looks like an accessible way in for the general public. So I like that it be open in that way.
Any other questions?
Other questions? Yes.
First of all, I actually really, it's on, I'm just not close enough to it. I'm really, in general, very excited about this.
I'm pretty excited too.
It's and I went by it back this morning before I went to the carousel and had another look around, and it's I'm really excited by it. You talk about the paying tribute basically to the botanical history of Santa Barbara. Of course, the future is evolving more towards natives, and you talked about recycled water on the site visit. If you talked about rain gardens, I didn't hear it, but I was wondering, do you have any plans for more than recycling, but actually doing the kind of water capture that many of us are trying to do in our own homes?
Actually, under current stormwater management criteria, you have to manage all the stormwater on site. And so it is being collected in areas throughout the hotel site and then slowly dispersed into the groundwater. So it's great, actually. It's really becoming part of our common practice standards rather than a unique hobby kind of thing. And just a quick note on the idea of use of natives versus other material. I do think there is, and we could debate this outside the room, but I think there is a tradition of sort of plant gathering and plant collecting that brings humans a lot of joy. And obviously, I think we've evolved, and we want to educate people that rather than bringing in birch trees and azaleas from places that have very dissimilar climates to ours, what we're really encouraging here is the education about other Mediterranean climates and drought-tolerant species that do well here, such as aloes and plants from South Africa or Australia.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
I just wanted to comment on the green space you were talking about and using alternatives to turf. I think that's a really good idea. I think something that looks like grass, but it's not necessarily grass, is a good idea. Like you're saying, to kind of help with, people walking by and dogs and all of that. I think that's a good idea. So I think you should definitely keep going along that line, okay. Especially, given the drought tolerant, nature of that versus the other alternative of
right.
turf. So I think that's a really good element that you're putting in there. And I think on the tour, you also had mentioned, or somebody had brought up potentially sort of labeling some of these plants and having it be more of an interactive kind of thing. Is that still
yes.
part of the plan?
That
down
is
the line?
part of the plan. Obviously, this will require a lot of scrutiny and interaction with staff, which we'll be happy to do. But we're at that point now where we'll start sort of exchanging those ideas. But signage, all those things. There is a new sign program for Chase Palm Park, so we'll be complying with that. And then any kind of interpretive signage we do, we'd like to encourage the use of QR codes so we can exchange a lot more information with the public without creating sort of a graphic jungle land.
Yeah. Well, I think that's good. I really, I know it's probably going to take a lot of effort, but I would encourage that, and I'm definitely in support of that because I think it's really a part. You put so much effort into this design and these plans. It would be great to get that information out a little bit more broadly to the public in any way possible.
Thank you.
Other questions? Then thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move into comments, and I would like to have the commission refer to the page 2 recommendations, and then add our comments. See if those are acceptable to the commission, and
Chair Longstreet,
yes.
could I just add a couple of things that maybe would be of use to the commission? As you know, there's a long history behind this location, the park, the future hotel. As part of that, we, as the department, have been involved in the work effort of American Tradition to come forward. There are some aspects of the concept plan that still need to be worked out, such as the design of the compass rose, the naming, all that sort of stuff, and that aspect is something we'll continue to work with the applicant on as it moves forward. It leads into these recommendations from staff, really specific to the trees mostly, because 10 years ago the project was going to move forward. We really hope, and I'm sure they hope, that it moves forward again, but like you have conditioned other projects, waiting until something actually happens, because once you go from concept plan to real plan, things move and change a little bit, and that's really what we're trying to say in these conditions, is that there's still more work to be done until we're done, kind of like the Las Positas Modoc and Cliff multimodal pathway. So that's why we've put these forward, because there's still more work to happen between the two parties before the project is finally ready to move forward.
I think that's true. I think where we're focused today and what is before us is the tree removals. The landscape plans and all that are not what's before us, but I think we want to give our opinion on those things because they affect the use of the park. This area of the park can have 5,000 people in it on a Thursday night concert, and that will continue to happen. So we're going to be neighbors throughout, and we want to be good neighbors, and we want to start our relationship with all the cards on the table, so that it's that the beautiful plantings going in stand up to the kind of use we see in our parks. It is a special site in that it is a beautiful hotel, and it's next to a very public open spot. So we want that transition zone to be work for everybody, so that the hotel is not frustrated with public use and the Parks Department is not frustrated with trying, with that relationship. So that's really where I come from on this. Also, the condition about, of course, nothing starts until ground is broken. We don't take a tree out. We did that, thank God, down Lower State Street, or we would have looked at a much different landscape on Lower State Street for many years, 20 or so. So, I look at these conditions and they all make sense to me. And the main comment that I just need, because this is budget night for us, and so it's in the forefront of our mind, is that we're not maintaining this. This is if it's put in by the hotel, it's maintained by the hotel. And that's kind of what I see. But I do agree with the conditions. And I think the comment that I would only want to add is that it needs to work as a public space, the transition zone. So, Ms. Elledge, come on up. We're a little more informal here than other.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to let you know that we had reviewed the recommendations and, of course, accept and agree with them. And we do think I believe it is within your jurisdiction and your authority to comment and advise your staff on these landscape plans that are within a city park. And we do share the objective that you just stated about how mutual this is, that we want it to work for everyone, and just to reaffirm what you know, which is that the hotel owner is responsible for the maintenance of this space and for the installation, and they are very serious about it and will be quite interested in it, obviously, because it surrounds their beautiful hotel property. So,
right.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
I mean, and just to remind the commission, we have a pretty new commission, but it has, we have dealt with the hotels in other areas, I would say in the Cabrillo Ball Field renovation, and big concerns about how a park is used. So it is it's a symbiotic relationship. We do have to all be at the table when we're talking about these things. So, yes. Thank you. So any other questions or comments? Yes, Ms.
Yeah,
McKee.
I guess aside from a comment that I think we're in actual violent agreement about Mediterranean landscapes being okay, but there's also room, I think, for the further education on natives. The question I had was around those trees that are to be boxed and moved, in particular the olives. Twofold. First of all, is that also the hotel's financial responsibility, the boxing and moving of the trees? And then what's a little bit on the process for how long it's going to take for them to find a new home, and are they going to be in as public a place where they can be enjoyed as much as they are now?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner McGill, whenever we've had trees removed and relocated, it's done generally by the applicant, because the applicant is proposing to remove the trees. We're working on a location which we'll share with the commission, and certainly the idea would be they would be ready to move, moved and planted, and they would be done in a public park for public enjoyment. And that would be, there has to be a real nexus that's of value to the community in order to warrant this type of investment. Looking at those trees, they're overall decent specimens, and it would be a shame to lose them. The other trees that they're proposing to relocate as part of their design of the transition area, that would happen as part of their project as well. We would be responsible for maintaining those trees once they were in their new location. That would not be something that we would ask of anyone to do.
Thank you. Okay, are we ready for a motion? Okay.
Okay. I move that the commission support the staff recommendations as delineated on page 2. I don't think I will read them all out.
No,
but that we support the staff recommendations on the tree removals in the transition zone.
Address the street tree designation.
And address the street tree and support the street tree designation change on Calle Cesar Chavez.
Okay.
Will that work?
Chair Longstreet, I suggest you do two separate motions.
I just move on the first one then.
Okay, and with comments? With our comments?
Yes.
Okay. So our comments will be included.
Yeah. Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. And that brings us to the street tree designation change in the 100 block of Calle Cesar Chavez. Okay, so we'll have a separate motion for that. Did you want to make that one also? No, you
don't have it in front of me, but I will move that we support the street tree designation change on Calle Cesar Chavez. From, and I can't remember, to the New Zealand Christmas tree and the magnolia, Samuel Summers.
Okay, and
And
the blue.
and the blue palms, yes.
Okay, so we have, you'll put in the right names, right? The proper names. Okay, is there a second to that motion? Okay. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, and that brings us to our next item, which is 2015 Santa Barbara Street, 4B1. And we do have a speaker for this item.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, at 2015 Santa Barbara Street, this proposal is in response to a significant alteration of setback trees in the front setback of the property. The applicant is requesting to remove the 5 Tipuana trees in that front setback and replace with slow-growing trees that can achieve 10 to 15 feet in height. The committee determined that larger canopy would be important for the neighborhood. They discussed several options and determined that an option that would work well for that measure would be to approve the removal of 3 of the Tipuana trees on the condition that the 2 remaining be on each side of the entry walk, and the actual trees to save could be selected by the property owner. So the recommendation is to approve on the condition that 2 trees be retained. As an addition to the enforcement case, if that's the way the commission moves forward, there would have to be an additional restoration plan to restore the canopy on those trees.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions of staff at this point? We do have a speaker for the item. Mr. Boxer, come on up.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, I'm Ken Boxer. I've owned that property since the year 2000. And when I purchased that property, I never realized that I had 5 aggressive trees that I have to deal with at least 3 times a year since the year 2000, which I'm paying approximately $1,800 to $2,000 a year to maintain. And they are just so aggressive that I've had several different tree cutters over the years. And this time he went overboard when I said just cut so I can see through from my window. And my bedroom window is the top right there on the house. And one of the things I really enjoy is to be able to see the mountains. And unfortunately, every 4 months, I have to hire somebody to trim these. And I've gone to, from these professionals like Beaver something trim, and he comes with all his paperwork and says, oh, I have all these degrees in this field, and yet he cuts them, and 4 months later, or 3 months later, or 4 months later, they're all back again. And I just said, okay, what I'd like to do is, as the gentleman said, is to remove all the trees and get less aggressive trees in front of my property. I live there, and it's just become so difficult to, first the expense. I just can't afford to keep expending this for these trees. Now, if there's a way, I've actually asked these people, these professionals, can you just cut them the right way so they're not going to be aggressive? And they say, this is the way, and they're still aggressive. So the 2 trees that they're asking to remain, one of them being right in front of my window. So it just defeats the purpose, and on 2 folds, defeating the purpose that I won't be able to see again out the window. And also, I'm going to have to continually prune these trees, at least 2 of them. So if I could take these 5 trees and remove them professionally and get them with 5 trees that will be slow growing to about, I think, 15 feet, I think is what they were saying. I'm not the professional. I have to hold them to a higher standard to do these things. All I do is take money out of my pocket to get the job done. So unfortunately, it's just one comedy after another, but it's not so funny because it's come to this point where you see them like almost bald, But now they're all back again. There's no pictures of what they look like today. Now, they grow really fast, as you probably all know. You're all professionals.
Yeah, if you could wrap up, please. Yeah, and we did. I did go by and see your trees. I think all of us try to go by and see them. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Is there questions of the applicant?
So at the end result, I'd like to get them all taken. If I have 2 trees remaining, I have the same problem again. We have to deal with it.
Did I hear you say you were willing to move them?
No, get rid of them.
Remove them.
I don't know where I'd move them to.
Okay, sorry. I just thought I heard that comment, and I was wondering why.
No. Did I say that I misspoke?
No. Okay, thank you. Are there questions? Yes.
Question for our arborist. They're aggressive growing from the ground up. What are they doing below the surface? Are they going to damage water lines? Are they going to damage cement? Are they going to damage foundation?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Perry, the species of tree it grows to be 60 to 80 feet tall and 60 feet wide. When aggressive pruning like this occurs, the tree tries to respond by putting its leaves back on in a very rapid pace because it breathes and eats through its leaves. So that's why it's being aggressive and growing. The root structure does have a similar growth rate, but it develops where it can get air and moisture, which is typically the top 3 feet of soil. So all the roots typically develop in the top 3 feet of soil. But as it gets farther away from the tree, they get much smaller in diameter. So the aggressive portion of tree roots are typically those closest to the trunk that get the largest. As it gets out to where the canopy is, they tend to be smaller than your finger. So it's really just a mass of roots out there. And the aggressive part would be near the trunk of the tree.
In the proximity of the walkway and the potential water lines, are they a threat to either of those?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Perry, I didn't investigate where the water line goes into the property, but it certainly is within range to be pushed by the tree roots. Tree roots don't typically break water lines. They do get into broken sewer lines when the sewer lines are broken, but in most cases they'll just kind of push unless it's a material that doesn't push so well, that just kind of pushes it out of the way as it grows.
Other questions? Yes.
So you were commenting on the growth, 60 feet, 80 feet tall by 60 feet wide. Is that what informed the decision to remove 3 and leave 2? There would be more space. I'm thinking 5 is way too many. 60 feet wide, I don't even know how many
60
feet.
to 80 feet high.
Well, you said 60 feet wide as well, right? It seems like overplanting, I guess, is my comment. If they're going to get that big, that seems like a lot, really close to each other in a relatively small space. I will admit I did not visit the trees. I would love to hear maybe from some of the other commissioners that did. But my question is about how did you determine 3 trees got to go, 2 can stay? Can you elaborate, please?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Martinez-Cohen, when the city makes decisions about spacing on street trees, we do take into consideration the eventual size of the tree so that we can get canopies that connect well enough to provide sufficient shade, but are separated far enough apart that they can develop more naturally. I would agree that 5 trees of this caliber in this space is much too many. The committee did comment that, one of the things that they discussed was, well, what if we allow them to remove all 5 and possibly replace with 2 trees that can achieve 30 feet in height? And the committee was generally supportive of that. They determined by leaving 2 existing trees that could be developed, the community would have a head start on a canopy over newly planted trees. But they would have supported a motion to plant, replace with 2 trees that can achieve 30 feet in height.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Did they make a recommendation of what type of tree that would replace it?
Chairline Street, Commissioner Perry, for setback trees, we don't typically recommend species specifically unless the applicant is proposing to plant a specific species. The committee tends to recommend an eventual size of the tree that would be appropriate for the lot.
Yes.
I guess I would like to ask the applicant if he prefers the 2 trees of 30 feet in height or keeping the 2 trees that remain
Would
there.
you like to come forward, Mr. Boxer?
Yeah, sure. Would you prefer to having all of them removed with the replacement of 2 trees that can get to 30 feet in height, or keeping the 2 trees with 3 new trees that are of the shorter height to 15 feet?
If that's the only choice, I would get rid of the 5 trees and replace them with the 2. And if they were to spread a little bit, that's fine. As far as you asked the question, well, what kind of trees would I want to replace them with, I would just contact the arborist. It doesn't matter to me.
Okay. And our arborist is happy to work with you on recommendations. Yes, over this side, Ms.
So I
McGill.
think we're converging on a similar theme here. Having gone up and taken a good hard look at this, I have a lot of sympathy with the homeowner. That's a rather dense tree pack in a small garden. So one of my questions is those street trees themselves, what's their canopy going to be? And is some of the goal not already being achieved with the street trees is my question. And then just kind of building on the conversation preceding, I'm hearing that there could be support for 2 30-foot canopy trees. In kind of the way I construct my world, it seems like there's grounds for a compromise here, particularly if those 30-foot trees could be configured in such a way that the view of the mountains is achievable, which is also something that I have a great deal of sympathy for.
Chairline Street, Commissioner McGill, the existing street trees are pretty much at the canopy that they will be. They've matured, they've stopped actively growing, they're just kind of there. If the commission goes with that second option to remove 5 and replace with 2 30-foot canopy trees, that is canopy in height. There's many different trees that have differing canopy spreads, and the location of those trees would be at the discretion of the applicant, although the committee did comment they would like to see, in that case, having one on each side of the lawn somewhere, or each side of the entrance sidewalk, just to kind of frame that entrance. So, but the exact locations would be up to the Mr. Boxer to decide.
Can I ask a follow-up? So then it's conceivable that the 2 framing trees, I'm assuming it's one of the framing trees that causes the problem. Well, probably not, actually. That could be configured so that your bedroom window is preserved. A combination of 30 foots and maybe 10 to 15 foots could get you what you needed and also frame the walkway.
Okay. So, any more questions? Anyone ready to entertain a motion?
I'll give it a go.
Okay.
I would like to move, I'm not sure how to do this, but I'm going to try. I would like to move that the commission approves the removal of the 5 Tipuana tipus on the condition that they are replaced by 2 trees capable of achieving a 30-foot canopy and 3 trees capable of a 10 to 15-foot canopy.
So you want to go with 5 replacements?
Well, I heard that, well, I'll go with 2 and then
2 is
okay,
what
I'll
the
go with
committee
2.
recommended.
Okay, I'll go with
Investment.
2.
Yeah.
Remove 5 and replace with 2 that are capable of achieving a 30-foot canopy, period.
Chair Longstreet, just for clarification, 30 feet of height,
Height.
correct?
Height, yeah.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion? And these trees will be in the setback. Okay. So if I see no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, and that brings us to 1506 Shoreline, and we do have a speaker for that one also. So,
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, at 1506 Shoreline Drive, they're proposing to do a little remodel on the home and build a deck out in front so that they can enjoy the outdoor space. They are proposing to remove this palm trunk in the front that is you can't see the head of. This Brazilian pepper tree and another Brazilian pepper tree over here on the east property line at the fence. The committee, the concerns were the overpopulation of trees and that the Brazilian peppers and the palms both sprout new trees that create trip hazard for the elderly residents, and they wanted to open that up again for a usable space. The committee visited the site and determined that the suckers and pups that grow from seed could be easily removed without creating too much maintenance issue. They determined that the tree on the east, at the east property line, is in declining condition, but the other Brazilian pepper tree is in fine shape, and their recommendation is to approve the tree at the east property line that is in declining condition and deny the other 2 removals.
okay, are there questions of staff? Okay, Mr. Walmsley? Welcome.
Thank you. I'm a landscape architect. My name is Leland Walmsley with Evergreen Landscape Architects, and representing the homeowner. So Tim mentioned that all 3 trees have issues with invasiveness. In fact, all 3 are considered invasive by the California Invasive Plant Council, and for good reason. The palm seeds, you're probably all familiar with that particular, they create quite a number of hazards on the sidewalk there. You can see the public right away is under those trees, as do the peppers. It's basically like a lot of ball bearings on that sidewalk, which is very heavily used since it's on Shoreline. They're giant trees. The lot is about 60 feet across in the front, and that pepper has been pruned every year, once a year. So that's what it's growing back to. And it's just dominating the entire space. It's creating dense shade. It's denying them any kind of solar access, so they're not getting any sunlight coming through or warming on that south exposure. Let's see. The roots are also uplifting the fence, which you can't really see on the far right. There's a greenish fence, which is the neighbor's fence, and then there's another fence that runs along the front of the property. It's kind of dark there. It's just not visible on that slide, but as well as running along the common property line between the 2 homes. And that fence has been repaired a number of times based on that. And they've got dogs, and the dogs, of course, there's an issue. If the dogs get out in the street, people drive fast on that street. So they're reseeding. And we are not just recommending. Up until last year, I was the chair of the Carpinteria Tree Advisory Board for the past decade. So I know that, it's not about cutting down trees. It's about what can we replace them with that makes sense. So to us, the palm tree is basically a telephone pole at this point. You can't even see the head of it. The scale, it goes up about, I believe, about 50 feet. And so what we're proposing is to put within the setback, and this is excluding any additional trees which would go behind the setback line, but within that setback, we're proposing to put in 6 additional trees to replace, which are palms, smaller scale, trees that are seen all over Santa Barbara that are drought adapted, pygmy date palms, and windmill palms, which are also happen to be, you can't see in this photo, but the neighborhood is very palmy, if that's such a word, and we are wanting to enhance the neighborhood with that palm kind of feel, but with palms of a smaller scale because most of the homes are 1 story. So we're proposing 6 additional trees in there with the removal of these. And then the other thing is too, you know, and I don't know how this goes within Santa Barbara, but my client really isn't willing to deal with the liability in terms of risk assessment. She doesn't want to have any liability for these trees for any trip and fall hazard that has to do with the public right-of-way. So there's also a lot of bicyclists that ride on that side of the street, a lot. So you've got a lot of ball bearings there as well. So those are our reasons. And again, we're not proposing just to cut down trees. It's just the wrong tree in the wrong place.
What height? The trees you're proposing, what height?
Do they ultimately get to, or are we initially? Ultimately, they get anywhere from about 8 to 20 feet tall, max. And we're proposing to put in trees that are anywhere from 4 to 8 feet tall, 24-inch box and bigger. Any other questions?
But all palms, no canopy trees?
No canopy trees within the setback, no.
Question?
Yes.
Isn't that
Barry? Yes, go ahead.
wasn't that house recently sold? Isn't this a new buyer or a new occupant?
It was, strangely enough, the new buyer grew up in that house. So her family sold the house, and when it came up on the market 2 years ago, she bought the house. So it is, those trees weren't there. Those are volunteers that came up since she was a child. Yeah. No, I know the corner very well. Right.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Comments?
I don't agree that that one palm tree is negligible. I think it goes with the skyline. It is a palmy neighborhood. There's a lot of other tall palms there. And I think just the fact that it's tall doesn't mean it needs to be removed.
Other? Mr. Perry, go ahead.
Brazilian peppers, I wish they never were brought here, so I'm probably not a good one to speak.
Okay. Ms. Armbruster, did you have a comment?
I just have a question for staff about I didn't see anything about the replacement trees on here. Can you just speak to your feelings on the replacement trees that he's suggesting?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Armbruster, the replacement trees he's talking about is kind of 2 styles. The pygmy date palm is kind of a clumping palm that is fairly small. That's the one that gets to be about 8 feet that he mentioned. And the windmill date palm is a single trunk palm that has the hair on the trunk. I don't know if you're familiar with that. They're very slow growing, and they can be 20, 25 feet tall. That's correct.
Yes.
And the staff and committee's recommendation to keep one of the Brazilians and the Mexican fan palm was due to that they were in good condition and they thought that they could be maintained with the pruning. Or can you explain again? I'm sorry, why you want to keep those?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Martinez-Cohen, the one Brazilian pepper tree is healthy. The committee commented that it provides some much-needed canopy in the area. It's pretty sparse in that area other than palms. Mm-hmm. And they didn't support the removal of the Mexican fan palm because it seems to fit with the neighborhood, the style and all the palms. You can see 9 or 10 of them in this photo, Mexican fan palms.
Yeah,
so,
you can, yeah.
It's consistent with other palms in the area.
Yeah.
Go
ahead. Yeah.
Yes.
So in answer to your question, there's different findings for they're like conditions for removal. And I think the one that the Street Tree Advisor Committee was thinking of when they looked at that tree is that the characteristic of the neighborhood would be materially affected with the removal. Like something would be different and changed and
lacking if they took it away. No, of the Brazilian pepper tree. I think.
One of the conditions.
Well, it's one thing you look at. You look at and you're like, well, is the neighborhood going to change, like the way it feels and looks going by it if it's gone? And you have to think about what that loss would be to the people who like see it every day, who live next to it. And
That's helpful.
It is helpful. And that front yard is overwhelmed a bit by it also. So you know, we're weighing two things on it, and we're looking at someone who wants to reclaim the use of their front yard. On the other hand, I think they're going to have a very hot front yard without a canopy tree to mitigate that. But yes.
Yeah, having gone by again and taken a good look at this, I was really struck by how just overgrown it all felt. Again, I had sympathy with the applicant because it had that a bunch of volunteers pinging up and being left to go over time look, as opposed to we planned it this way look. And the things that, if it had been my yard, I'd be really wanting to deal with more than the palm, the Mexican fan palm, didn't seem to be offensive except that it was impinging on a pepper tree. That seemed to be really its only problem in life. The pepper tree kind of felt more like a dense hedge than a proper canopy tree. And, you know, I would certainly be inclined to support removing the pepper trees. Question if there is a need for a canopy in that area, and I didn't really see it. I didn't get that feel of this is a place that needs a canopy because it's not really the flavor of the neighborhood. Is there something else that could be planted that could scratch both itches in terms of getting rid of kind of an overgrown weed of a tree, but also providing some manageable canopy?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner McGill, there are numerous trees that might fit the bill here. I'd be happy to work with the applicant on a potential replacement tree if the commission decides to go that direction. It would be important to come up with a size, potential size canopy that you feel might be suitable for that. So that would help guide us to selecting an appropriate tree with them.
I sort of am in agreement with Commissioner McGill. I would probably support the removal of the pepper trees on the condition that they replace it with at least one tree that reaches the 30-foot sort of canopy level, more than the palms that they were suggesting. I would feel more comfortable if there was a bigger tree there. And I think I would also support the denial of removing the palm. I like the palm. I think the palm goes
to skyline tree.
Yeah, to the skyline. But I feel the pepper tree conundrum. And I don't know if the other commissioners think that. Okay.
before we make a motion, I have one last comment. It is just one pepper tree, but I would hardly call it. What did you call it? An invasive weed or a weed of a tree?
Obviously, I have them too.
And I sympathize with property owners and their rights and wanting to be able to put a beautiful deck out there and enjoy their property. But one tree at a time, we could denude Santa Barbara of its urban forest.
That is true. So I would entertain a motion, and we'll see what flies on this issue. It's a tough one.
Yeah, I would make the motion that the commission approve the removal of the 2 Western Brazilian pepper trees and deny the removal of the Mexican fan palm on the condition that there is a replacement tree that can achieve 30-foot height. That's more of a canopy type tree. Is that the right?
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion? Ms. Armbruster.
I guess my question to you guys is just that we're not including anything about the palm trees that they're suggesting adding as well, just the one tree.
Well, that they would do their landscape plan, I would assume. Or redesign it to accommodate, but we would.
Yeah, I guess since I'm the one who made the motion, my feeling is that those trees aren't really comparable replacement trees to the ones that we're removing. Right. So I would feel like our condition should be made on a replacement tree that is more comparable to what is being removed, as far as replacing the canopy and kind of keeping the feel.
Okay.
May I make a comment?
Yes, sir.
There's an eastern and western Brazilian pepper that you only said western, so I don't know if the motion needs to be amended. There's two trees. She said western pepper as though it was the name of it. She said western
Chair
Brazilian
Longstreet and
pepper.
Commissioner Perry, there's no difference between eastern and
Well,
western.
but there is here. And the way it was said, it sounded like just the one tree at the western end.
The description in the packet is their location within the property.
I understand.
And she said both trees.
And her motion was both pepper
western.
trees.
My other question is the 30-foot canopy. I don't believe a Brazilian pepper achieves a 30-foot canopy. So is that something that should be included in the motion? And I defer to you.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Perry, Brazilian peppers can get up to 30 feet. This motion on your dais is one that would give them options to select a number of trees that can fulfill that. Brazilian pepper is one of those. I doubt that that's the direction that they'll go, but they certainly have a multitude of trees that can meet that requirement.
Can I just ask one question? So if we're talking about 30 foot in diameter, what would you say that current picture is of where the Brazilian pepper is now? Like how much higher would 30 foot be?
Did you mean 30 feet in diameter or 30 feet in height?
In height.
Yeah, height. So 30 feet in height. Yeah. I think that gives the applicant the choice of many different trees that have different growth patterns that could provide more space in their front yard.
How tall is the tree that we're looking at?
That tree's about...
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Armbruster, that tree is probably around 22, 25 feet right now.
Okay. It'll achieve up to 30 feet. Okay. We have a motion on the floor.
So I just want to clarify that the motion is for a 30-foot in height.
Yes.
Replacement.
Yes. Okay. So we have a motion to remove the 2 Brazilian peppers, deny the removal of the palm on the condition that it is replaced with 1 canopy tree that can achieve a 30-foot height.
Thank you. That's why she's the chair.
Okay. We're clear. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. 1 opposed. And all of our decisions are appealable within 10 working days to the City Council. Right. Okay, so now we move on to 4C. We've already taken care of number 3, so we have the 1300 block of State Street.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, the 1300 block of State Street, for some reason, has never had a tree designated to be planted. The staff brought this to the table to kind of fill that hole where we didn't have a designation. The existing trees are primarily the queen palms in that block. There are a few king palms as well. The committee felt that block was supported well by the existing queen palms, and so their recommendation is to designate Cyagrus romanzophianum queen palm for the 1300 block of State Street.
Okay. Seems like a simple one. Questions? Entertain a motion?
The poor block, 1300 block, they need a designation. So I would make the motion to agree with the staff recommendation to designate the queen palm for the 1300 block.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. And that brings us to 4C2, and we do have a speaker for this item. You all received an email from Mr. Cunningham also. So Mr. Downey, would you like to introduce this?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, you may recall the 34th through 3700 block of Modoc Road is the site of a portion of the multi-modal pathway for bicyclists and pedestrians to provide a safe passage for those individuals through the area. At a previous meeting, the commission designated island oak for the street trees out there. We brought this up again because there was an interest to provide a second designated tree to offset the existing designation of island oak and provide some contrast and interest. The committee reviewed numerous trees. Staff discussed those trees, their benefits and detriments. The committee determined that, well, I'll start with these two here. The one on the left is the one that is currently designated. The one on the right is Santa Cruz Ironwood. You'll note that it has those white flowers, and the more feathery texture kind of provides a contrast to the dark green of the island oak. The committee is recommending this as designated, co-designated, and staff also supports that designation. On this slide, the tree on the left is Aesculus californica, California buckeye. With these two trees on this slide, I want to point out that they are more rounded and less upright than the two previous ones. They would require additional maintenance to develop their canopy above the bike path and the roadway. The tree on the right is Chinese pistache. It is deciduous, and that's the fall color that you're seeing in the photograph. The California buckeye does develop a seed cluster that is about the size of a baseball. And the staff is concerned with its drop onto the path, creating issues between pedestrians and bicyclists. The staff supports only the ironwood, mainly because of maintenance reasons. We get too many trees of varying maintenance needs, and we have to visit them at differing times, which adds to our maintenance costs. The other aspect is there isn't, in many of the sections, there isn't a lot of trees within the sections, so getting 4 different species of trees out there is a bit onerous for staff to deal with. The committee does support the designation of the ironwood, which was on the previous slide, the California buckeye on this slide, and the Chinese pistache as co-designated. Staff recommends the commission only designate the ironwood, which is on the previous slide. We will work with Public Works staff to find, in fact, have already discussed this with Public Works staff, to find locations that are outside the street tree designation portion, but within the project to find locations where the California buckeye would fit into those locations. And we've identified 2 or 3 larger open spaces that would support that species of tree. So staff supports the designation of the Santa Cruz ironwood. The committee recommends co-designation of the Santa Cruz ironwood, California buckeye, and the Chinese pistache.
Okay. Are there questions of staff at this time, or?
Yeah, that is confusing. I'm sorry. You have to. Excuse me. You got to repeat it again. So the current designation is the island oak and the jacaranda.
We removed jacaranda.
Okay, so
2 months ago.
jacaranda's out. Island oak is still in, and the staff is recommending the co-designated tree would be the Santa Cruz ironwood. But the stack recommendation includes the ironwood and these two other, the Buckeye and the other one.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
That's correct.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to clarify.
All right. Come on up, Mr. Cunningham.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. I've got a few issues with the
We hadn't noticed.
what is before you. First of all, it's a matter of procedure, and the 4 members of the Street Tree Advisory Committee who attended that particular meeting left the meeting with the impression that we were in agreement with staff that the 4 co-designations we had recommended were acceptable. And now we find out in the staff report that that's not the fact. I would appreciate it if you would return this to the committee for further discussion with staff so that when we finish our deliberations, we are in agreement. Whether we have 4 trees or 2 trees, I just think it would be a whole lot more efficient for me, because I didn't want to really be here today, much as I enjoy speaking with you. I just think it would be, I think the committee would appreciate it if we had a full enough discussion with staff to know at the end of our meeting that what was being proposed was either acceptable to staff or not. We left with the impression that we had 4 trees. With regard to the seed pods of the California Buckeye, I would dispute the contention that a tennis ball or baseball size, very slick seed pod that's lightweight would be an issue for a bicycle, because I think when a bicycle tire hits something that size, it's going to just kick it out of the way. Now, it was baffling to me that we all didn't think about the fact that the island oaks are going to go through periods during the year, and it doesn't happen every year, but every now and then we get a huge drop of acorns from our oak trees. And acorns are about the size of marbles, and they're hard. And if we're concerned about the jacaranda dropping stuff or the buckeye dropping stuff, we're overlooking something that's probably more dangerous than either one of them, and that is a bunch of marbles on the roadway. So I don't think we can say one tree is too messy or too dangerous, while the majority of the trees that we're planting are much more dangerous, in my opinion. The other issue is, while I understand staff's need to have efficiency in their work schedule and not introduce more work, the fact that the Buckeye and the pistache might be on a different pruning cycle than the oaks or the ironwoods shouldn't really preclude our efforts to diversify our urban forest. And the Buckeye in particular is a tree that we have very few of in town. These are both slow-growing trees. Yeah, they will probably need to be pruned once a year to train them to accommodate the bikeway, but I don't consider that onerous. I mean, I don't make the budget. That's something that you need to worry about it.
And we do.
But I would say, go to City Council and let them know. I mean, I'm sure you do this every year, because every year they short you of funds. But I would hate to see us limit the diversity of our urban forest because we just can't afford to take care of an additional species of tree or 2. So essentially my bottom line request is return this to the Street Tree Advisory Committee for another deliberation. I think you've got time to do this. I don't think the project's on a tight deadline where we have to make a decision today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Questions or comments? Yes.
So, Mr. Cunningham, if it does go back to stack, do you think it would be feasible that you guys will be able to find diverse species of trees that could all be on the same pruning schedule and don't drop hazards?
We'd have to talk about that with staff, and we didn't get that input when we spoke about this before. I think I prepared a list of about a dozen alternate trees, and we settled on these.
Okay.
But there are others on the list that might be more acceptable.
Okay.
Okay. Other comments? I have some comments. Yes, maintenance is important, and it's wonderful to. Diversity needs to be planned in a way we can manage it. Maybe those trees need to be in a park. Maybe they need to be somewhere where they're not a street tree, and that doesn't work. We're not going to get any more money. We're just not. And this project is a project for public benefit, so I don't want to see it become held hostage to anything at all. And I think 2 designations in that area are plenty, whatever comes up, because it's surrounded by other diversity. It's not like they're clear cutting all the way to the railroad right away and we're not going to have other trees there. This is kind of how I look at it. But maintenance, for the last, especially since 2008, has been an incredible challenge. When my ex-husband was on the tree crew, we had 3 complete tree crews in this city, and we do not have those anymore, and we will never have them again. So I take it very seriously because I don't like it to look bad once we've planted it, and that's what happens. And then we hear how we don't maintain our trees, or we feel badly that we're unable to maintain our trees the way they should be. So I would, if the commission sends it back to come up with one recommendation, I would prefer there only be 2 trees. I would prefer that this project not be held hostage in any way. There's a landscape architect involved in it that's made some plans that are reasonable plans also. So, and that the budget be considered. So those are my kind of opinions on it. Yes?
So if I agree with all that, I don't think the project should be held hostage, and I think we need to have as low maintenance as possible. But I think when we first started considering tree species for this, we were concerned with the rural atmosphere or rural appearing impression you get when going through that neighborhood, which is, I think, why we picked island oak in the beginning. And I think a diversity of trees, whether it be 3 or 4 that can all be on similar schedules and have low maintenance would be preferable to 2, because it'll just enhance that rural feel.
I think we really, though, need to look at how many spots we're filling. We're not filling 50 trees.
I don't know how many.
Mr. Downey, how many trees are in? Do you recall? This is a kind of slam
Chair
question.
Longstreet, I don't have that figure in front of me, but as I recall, I believe it was 57 along this stretch of Modoc.
This stretch?
Yes.
So we were going to plant. Okay. Well, how about if it goes back to STAC with the plan where they're looking at it? I think we really do need to consider the maintenance. It also mentions the availability, and that we look at it holistically.
Yeah, and I would just make the comment, it sounds like there was some miscommunication going on here between the staff and the STAC. I don't know, I'm not on that committee. But I would support Mr. Cunningham's request to have a more robust conversation with the STAC and the staff to kind of flesh out these issues so that everybody's on the same page. I'm sort of a fan of kind of having consensus. And unless there is a serious time constraint, upon making this decision today, I would support that recommendation to go back to STAC and have a good, solid communicating effort on this with the maintenance costs in mind, et cetera, everything we said here today. Is there any reason why that we need to do this right now?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Martinez-Cohen, there's plenty of time to send it back to the committee if that's the desire.
Yeah, because this project is not funded yet.
That's correct.
There's that.
there's that.
Okay, so I will make the
but
motion
we
to.
do hope
Okay.
that it's funded, and we hope it's funded with reasonable planting so that they can move it forward. That's, yes, I agree with diversity, but I just, we don't have deep pockets in these grant-funded programs, and I want to make sure it happens. This is an important project to happen. Ms. McGill.
I'm going to be in violent agreement with a lot of what's being said here, but I think it's, I'm fine with it going back to committee. I definitely don't want the project held hostage. I think it is absolutely reasonable that staff can, that it's within their purview to say, here are our criteria, and these criteria need to be met, and whatever decision's made. I mean, I think it's totally acceptable for staff to say, we need to have a manageable maintenance schedule. We need to have, no more than X trees, et cetera, and then let the committee work within those boundaries.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair Longstreet?
Yes.
If I could just add a few comments to this discussion for your consideration. We do, on occasion, come to you with a different recommendation than what the Street Tree Advisory Committee has. And it's my understanding that there was quite a bit of discussion. Generally, we have to take a number of things into consideration. If you look at our performance measures in your budget packet, we trimmed 4,400 street trees last year. That represents 1/7, 1/8 of what we have. We routinely are underfunded and unable to reach all of the trees that we have. That's not entirely the discussion. We also very much support the concept of having more than one designated species because of the diverse appearance, whether it flowers or what it might be that's different, and that makes sense. And I think one of the strategies we discussed, which is why it's in your staff report, is the interest in having, for example, the California buckeye, which I understand is difficult to secure and obtain, does have these seed pods that might be an issue, is there is right-of-way associated with this project that's not in the developed parkway. So we're trying to find a way to balance the interests of the Street Tree Advisory Committee with what we thought was reasonable and feasible moving forward. From our standpoint as staff, we think trying to limit to 2 designated species probably makes the most sense given this location and given the variety of issues that we have. I can tell you there's many people in Santa Barbara that wished we were paying attention to trees a lot more frequently than we're currently able to, and we agree. Unfortunately, there won't be any maintenance funding associated with this project. There'll be funding to install it, and that's where it will stop.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, so I'm still going to go ahead and make the motion that we take this back to the stack and that we come up with 2 at the most designations, given all these maintenance issues and constraints. I think I would like to see a little bit more consensus. I mean, obviously you cared enough to come over here and write a letter and stand up here and talk to us about it. So it seems like you want to have more discussion on it and be a little bit more involved. So
If I can just comment, if you send it back with the direction to come up with 2 trees, you're not going to see anything more than what Mr. Downey has presented, the island oak and the Santa Cruz ironwood. So there's really no point in returning it to stack.
I hear what you're saying.
I think as a staff member, I'm willing to consider maybe 1 more species, not 2. And I think we may be able to come to agreement with staff on another tree. But if we limit it to 2 trees, we've already selected 2 trees, just half of what we wanted.
Got it.
So sending it back for 2 trees, we're not going to get anywhere.
Send it back for further discussion with the caveat that the concerns of the commission need to be considered, and that it is an advisory recommendation, and we will up here, as you see tonight, we didn't go with all your recommendations. We'll make some considerations. But we've made it loud and clear what our considerations are and that the limitations we have. So is that?
Yeah.
So we have that motion. Is there a second to that motion? Okay, we have a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Okay. We are about to go into budget, but I think we should we have director's report after we take a 5-minute break. We're not coming up? Okay, so we're calling back to order the Parks and Recreation Commission meeting, and we are at the director's report. Ms. Zachary?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, a few fun and exciting things to report on. The first being the Chef Apprentice graduation event that we had at the West Side Center. Your staff report gives you quite a bit of detail about, we had 30 kids go through the program, students I should say, and they prepared the entire meal, the hors d'oeuvres, the main course, the dessert. They filled the large room, community room, so over 100, I think, people that attended, and the food was fantastic. So it was a tremendous amount of work, and they just did a really great job. As you recall, they used to do the hors d'oeuvres for the Urban Wine Trail event for the Park Foundation. We'll hopefully get back to something like that in the near future, but in this instance, it was a great opportunity to celebrate their achievements and to fundraise for the next class. This is, I think, the 8th year that this program's been going on, and it's 50% funded through grants and 50% funded by the department. So it's really a very exciting and fun event, and the volunteerism is tremendous as well. And then Chair Longstreet mentioned the Carousel House earlier in today's meeting, and the fact that today was our grand unveiling. And want to thank the commissioners that came out to take a peek at what we have. It was sad to see the carousel go. I think a lot of people were shocked initially, and to sort of take that shock and turn it into something really positive, like how to bring that building into use for park users, use for events. We invested significant sum of our capital funds with a focus on making it happen. And we're very, very excited, not only for the community events that can occur there, the recreation activities that can occur there. We already have a number of people excited about it. I'd like to point out that that was a great example of our department working with Public Works Facilities to get the job done. Rich Hanna was in the lead to move it forward, but we relied on our project staff, we relied on our recreation and special event staff, we relied on Public Works Facilities. If you recall, the carousel left in early December. It's April. So we really hit the ground running with the new year and moved forward with turning it into a great event space. So look for another opportunity to come enjoy it. In fact, I'm going to pre-invite you, and you'll get a follow-up email from me. We have our annual staff breakfast and awards event on May 9th, and we're having it at the Carousel House. So I will forward that to you and ask you if you're available to come to RSVP. I think it's from 8:30 to 10. So we'll be testing out the facility ourselves and see how it works for our event. Earth Day happens every year, and once again our department participated in Earth Day. Staff come out and staff a table, talk about who we are and what we do, answer questions. The Creeks Division does its work effort. We do it also for Parks and Recreation, talking about what we're doing and how we serve the public. And then volunteer work days. I want to point out that the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints had their 9th annual work day at Alice Keck Park Memorial Garden, which is pretty phenomenal. 9 years in a row. That's the kind of volunteer support that really we appreciate and moves things forward. And there's people that come back every single year, and there's kids that get older and they come back every year. And I want to thank Santos Escobar for his work effort. And then State Trails Day, Commissioner Clark mentioned. We had it on Saturday as well. It's one of the 3 events that we co-host with the county and also Los Padres Forest. And this year we had it on Jesucita Trail. As you can imagine with the mudslides, it's been very challenging to address the trail issues in the eastern area of the front country, and we'll report to you on our work effort related to that in the near future. More use on the western area of the trails, definitely. We had 35 folks come out. Steve Biddle, who's one of our park supervisors, has been leading those initiatives and helping organize and make them happen. So always thankful for the kind of volunteer support we have, and you'll hear soon enough in our budget presentation that really looking for opportunities to expand that in the next year. Not only for what it does to help maintain our parks, but also for what it means for people's connection to our parks and our open space areas, because everybody has a personal connection for whatever reason. And if we can build those connections, then we also continue to build support for and desire to work with us as we either launch new initiatives or try to overcome challenges that we have. And that's all I have, unless you have questions.
Are there questions of staff? I would just like to say Jesucita is going to be a very important trail with the damage done south of here. So thank you to everyone who participated in that. Yes, Ms. Clark, did you have a question?
Say one more time how impressed I was and delighted with the carousel place. And I hope to go to a lot of weddings there. It's beautiful. And the fact that the revenue generated is going to help us offset other programs in the department is amazing. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, Chair Longstreet and Commission.
Yes.
We now have
The budget,
on to
yes.
our major item of the agenda, our recommended budget for fiscal year 2019. I'm going to talk through a few of the initial slides. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Cameron Benson, who'll talk about Creeks Fund, and then turn it back to Mark Sewell, who will walk through our general fund and the Gulf Fund. I'll also point out that Rich Hanna, Judith McCaffrey, and Santos Escobar are here to answer any questions and add any information that the Commission might have as we walk through this. We are in the second year of a 2-year financial plan, so nothing is substantively different than last year, but there are a few things that we'd like to point out to you as it relates to our revenues and our expenditures and some issues that we're facing related to cost increases and how we're trying to address that. And then this time next year, we'll have a new 2-year financial plan and be talking more in more detail also about our 6-year capital program. So next slide, please. So our mission, we have a lot of things that we do in Park and Recreation. We provide clean and safe parks, beaches, recreation facilities. Our mission is to enhance Santa Barbara's beauty, promote stewardship of resources, provide quality recreation and cultural experiences, and community services to improve the quality of life for Santa Barbara residents. To do that, we have 5 different funds, if you include Capital Fund, the Creeks Fund, the Gulf Fund, the General Fund, which is what largely funds parks, recreation, and administration. Capital Fund, the city has an entire capital fund of which we have a portion. And then we have a miscellaneous fund, which allows us to place money that's from grants and other sources in a special fund that we use to support our programs and services. When we look at our department, when you look at it programmatically, and you'll see that in your budget packet, particularly newer commissioners, everything's budgeted according to programs. We have 19 different program budgets, different funds. Our total permanent FTE staffing is just under 90.5, and then we have 110,000 hourly hours, which always surprises other departments, certainly, but we know that largely comes from our summer and our recreation programs. In addition to myself and Rich Hanna, we have managers in each one of the divisions: recreation, business, parks manager, and creeks manager. You'll note we have a recreation manager position that's currently vacant. That position is being held vacant to help support savings from the Cabrillo Pavilion closure, but we'll be looking toward filling that position in the middle of next year in anticipation of the building reopening, or some form of that position to bring back what we need for recreation. When we look at our budget, expenditure by fund, as you can see, the general fund makes up about 68% of the 24.7 million. Gulf 11% at 2.8 million, and then Creeks at 19%, 4.6 million, almost 4.7 million. And then when we look at the revenue by fund, you can see our total revenue out of that $24.7 million expenditure budget. Almost 13 million of it comes from revenue. The general fund, the revenue is through our recreation programs and services and facilities and special events, and then also Parks Division. Creeks Fund is all Measure B, which you'll hear more about, and then the Gulf Fund is all from services provided at the golf course and revenue generated there. So just to give you a key view on some initial initiatives that we have moving forward, as we have in prior years, a key focus of the department on all fronts, all funds, is infrastructure reinvestment. In the case of the Creeks Division, obviously it's really reinvestment in the natural world and the natural systems as well as stormwater systems. In Gulf, it's reinvestment in that one facility. And then everywhere else, it's reinvestment in parks, recreation facilities. We will continue to bring forward projects, programs, and initiatives that do just that, because so much of what we have is aging. In some cases, it's falling apart. And the more we can invest now, the better we'll be set up for the future. Some other initiatives we have is expanding out adult fitness. At Career Recreation, we're setting up a fitness studio in one of the former dance studios, and you'll have a presentation on that in the near future. You know the Cabrillo Ballpark is under construction. It will have a circuit course of 13 pieces of equipment that will complement the 4 that we have at the Bird Refuge, and then what we end up doing at the Cabrillo Pavilion when it opens. And so really finding a way to bring more people outside to do fitness. The Carousel House will also provide an opportunity to do that as well. Water conservation, that hasn't changed. Unfortunately, we're still in the drought and we're facing, significant decisions on a regular basis. We're always looking to increase our indoor facility bookings. I mentioned our Carousel House. We've done some good work in this last year to move that forward, and we're going to continue to do that through marketing and also through, as you know, we just launched Perfect Mind, which was a tremendous work effort on the part of staff to make happen. Enhancing people's ability to do business with us is going to make them want to do more business with us, whether it's a program, a service, or a special event. And then lastly, through everything we do a lot of outreach to the community. We do foster volunteerism, but we're also looking in the next year for new ways to enhance that, to find other ways to communicate about who we are and what we do, so that residents and visitors have a better understanding of the resources that we provide to the community. And now, I'll turn it over to Cameron Benson.
Thank you, Jill. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Cameron Benson. I'm the Creeks Division Manager, and I'll be presenting the proposed FY19 Creeks Division budget. As you all know, most of the revenue for the Creeks Division comes through Measure B, about 94% of the money. Measure B was a voter-approved 2% hotel bed tax. The revenue from that tax goes into a special fund that is restricted for specifically for improving stormwater quality and surface water quality and carrying out creek restoration improvements. Jump into the numbers. I'm going to start with the revenues for FY19. The Finance Department is projecting a slight increase in Measure B revenues from the current fiscal year to FY19, as well as an increase in interest. So we're looking at a total increased revenue projection for FY19 of $223,000. On the expenditure side, the FY19 budget is very similar to our FY18 budget, but there are a few key differences. As you can see in this column here, these are our proposed changes from FY18 to FY19. We have an increase in salaries and benefits of about $47,000, slight decrease in our supplies and services cost by about $25,000, and then a $90,000 proposed increase in the street sweeping program transfer. I did want to mention this $10,000 increase that's just listed under other here is our property tax payment for property that we purchased that's actually just outside the city boundary in the county, and we did a creek restoration project. It's a 14-acre parcel on Arroyo Burro, and so we have a new line item in our budget to pay property taxes for that. So we're looking at a total increase year over year of about $130,000. And then we have that's sort of offset by a slight decrease in our capital program transfer, where the funds move through our operating budget into our capital program. And in the current year, we had a $1,925,000 transfer. We're looking at $1,875,000 in the upcoming year. And that money will go to several different projects, and I will talk about that in a moment. So total proposed budget for FY19 is just under $4.7 million. This chart breaks down how the money is spent based on our three major program areas, which are water quality improvement, creek restoration, and community education and outreach. This generally follows our Creeks Advisory Committee recommendation of allocating about 50% of our operating budget to water quality, 25% to creek restoration, and 25% to community outreach. Just to give it some examples of what those program areas entail, water quality is everything from creek and beach cleanups to our water quality research and monitoring and lab costs for all of our water quality programs. The creek restoration section involves our creek restoration project maintenance, so we have a lot of sort of landscaping maintenance that is ongoing, our invasive plant removal program, and then we have a creek tree program where we plant native riparian trees on private properties along the creeks in the city. And in our outreach and education program, we have watershed education in schools, community events, and also television, radio, web, and print public service announcements regarding water quality and how to improve water quality in the city. Some budget highlights for the year. As I mentioned, on the revenue side, we have proposed increase in revenues by $225,000 from our FY18 budget. And then on the expense side, we have a fairly significant increase in our street sweeping expense. We're going from $100,000 in FY18 to $190,000 being proposed in FY19. We're proposing a $30,000 increase in our creek and beach cleanup line item, and that's an increase from $150,000 to $180,000. And the purpose for that is to increase cleanups along the shoreline. We started doing that as a pilot program, and we found that we get a fairly significant amount of trash every day we go out there. So in FY19, we're looking at not only doing creek cleanup and beach cleanup, but we're increasing the number of beach cleanups to 3 times a week. We'll have crews walk all the way from Ledbetter down to East Beach and remove all the trash along the shoreline. We have a $50,000 decrease proposed for our capital improvement program transfer. And then as we do most years, we use our reserve Creeks Fund reserve to balance our budget, largely because of the amount of capital program funding we have. So we're proposing to transfer $463,000 from our reserve to balance our budget. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Our proposed capital program for FY19 was reviewed and approved by the Creeks Advisory Committee back in October. We have a number of of projects that will receive some funding. All of them are at different levels. We have some that are in the outreach and planning stages, some that are in design, and some that are getting ready to go to construction. All of these projects have been funded in part in past budgets. I wanted to specifically highlight 3 of these projects. The Arroyo Burro Open Space Restoration is a restoration project that we have at the end of Allen Road on a parcel that the city purchased a couple of years ago. It's a fairly significant project on Arroyo Burro. About 1,800 linear feet of the creek will be restored, and we are hoping to begin construction on that in August, and we should be finished sometime in October. I wanted to note the Arroyo Burro restoration at Hidden Valley. This is in Hidden Valley Park, and it's in the natural area of Hidden Valley Park. Also a pretty lengthy stretch of Arroyo Burro. I think that one is about 1,600 linear feet. That's going to be all vegetation management, really. We're not doing any kind of major grading or anything within the park, but we will be coming in and removing a lot of invasive plants, planting a lot of native riparian plants in the park. That should also take place late this summer and into the fall. And then lastly, we have a $400,000 contribution into the Andre Clark Bird Refuge restoration effort, and we're slowly building up money in that project so that once we have a design that is permitted for water quality improvement and restoration, we'll be able to move forward. The next phase of that project is to advance our design for the project, and we've been meeting with all of the layers of permitting agencies that we have to go through on the project. I think we have 7 different permitting agencies that we need to work with. So we've been meeting with all of them and just getting the nuanced details of our project description together, and then we'll move forward with whatever additional technical studies we need and move the design forward as well. This slide represents our capital funding over the years, going back to fiscal year 2012. And what it shows is how we try to leverage the Measure B funds with grants that might be available in any given year. And the blue is the portion of our capital program that's funded by Measure B, and the purple, whatever color this is the portion represented by grants. And as you can see, those amounts go up and down from year to year, but we have several years where we're able to leverage the Measure B dollars, bring in much more in grant funding. Some years we've even brought more in grant funding than we've gotten from the entirety of Measure B. And in the current fiscal year, we're not doing too bad. We ended up securing 2 grants for $550,000 each, so $1.1 million for the Arroyo Burro Open Space Restoration Project. One thing I do want to mention about that is because of the speculative nature of those grants, we don't include those grant revenues in our revenue projections every year. And I just want to say, since 2002, we've been very successful at getting grant revenues. What all this adds up to is just under $20 million since 2002. And the Creeks Division staff has just done a fantastic job making themselves aware and researching grant opportunities, and we really leave no stone unturned in our effort to make sure we leverage the Measure B dollars for this community. And so our reserves, the Creeks Fund has an unappropriated reserve, and the Creeks Advisory Committee has set a target balance for that reserve of approximately $3 million. And so that's what we shoot for. And because of the success we've had with grant funding, and because of increasing TOT, as well as efficiencies that we try to work into our program, we're looking at ending the current fiscal year with just over $3 million, $3.15 million. But we are looking at at utilizing $463,000 to balance the FY19 budget, which would put us just under $2.7 million at the end of FY19. So given our history, we feel comfortable recommending going forward with the budget with that balance, and that we will keep it close to the $3 million target. The Creeks Division has about 24 different performance measures. These are all criteria that we use to make sure we stay on track and we're getting work done. I just wanted to highlight a few of those from each of our program areas. So a couple of our water quality performance objectives include producing an annual water quality report that we can provide to the public. It's online, and it has all of our weekly water quality monitoring data results, and we also do an annual report. We also do a 5-year report, and so people are able to look at that and see trends in water quality over time. We have a performance objective to complete a construction of a stormwater treatment retrofit project. In the coming year, what we're looking at is using dry wells to treat stormwater runoff off of the streets in the city, and we're going to install a couple of those as a pilot project, and they'll provide natural treatment of the stormwater and also shallow groundwater recharge. On the creek restoration program area, one of our objectives is to complete construction of the Arroyo Borough Open Space Restoration Project. As I mentioned, we're hoping to complete construction of that. I think our permits will require us to be finished with that project by middle of November at the latest. We hope to finish it in October, and then hopefully have some rain to help with the irrigation of all the native plants that we put in. And then lastly, one of our objectives with our outreach and education is to provide watershed education programs to over 3,000 school-age children in Santa Barbara. And we have had that as an objective every year, and we've met that objective and usually exceed it by at least a couple hundred. And so it is pretty amazing to think about when you look back over the years, and we've had that in place now for at least 15 years, I think. So that gets us up around 50,000, more than half the population of the city we've had go through watershed education programs, and that really, I think, will have an impact on water quality in Santa Barbara going into the future. And then lastly, I wanted to let you know our Creeks Advisory Committee met last week and reviewed the proposed FY19 budget. They recommended approval of the proposed budget with the exception of the increase for the residential street sweeping program. And I think you've been provided with the complete letter with the details of their recommendation. And with that, I will conclude, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay. Questions of Mr. Cameron? Yes.
Since I missed the meeting, I kind of want a couple more details on this sort of comments about the street sweeping program. What's the likelihood that that's going to fly? That they would not, that they would be, because this is recommending that the creeks, the police, the streets division conduct a review of the program to ensure that one, all of the parking revenue, that they can get is there in an equitable amount. And then two, that whether, these 3 full-time positions are performing full-time street sweeping enforcement. I'm just curious what impact can this recommendation or these comments actually have on the budget? I mean, you probably don't know, but I'd like to hear your feedback.
I don't know the answer, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I don't know the answer to that question specifically, but what I can do is provide a little bit more context than just this letter. The street sweeping program in the city is an interesting program in that it's broken into a couple categories. There's a commercial street sweeping program and a residential street sweeping program. Mm-hmm. It's a program that is administered by one department in the city, and it's implemented by another department in the city, and it's paid for by another department in the city. And so that makes things interesting and complex sometimes. And the Creeks Advisory Committee has had a long history of being very involved with the budget. I mean, we do go through the budget on a line-by-line basis every year. And this has been an issue that's been singled out by the committee often, not every year, but often. And I think one of the things that caught their attention this year was an almost doubling of the contribution from Measure B, and they were concerned about that. And I think what you see in some of these details is that they would like some additional information that I wasn't able to provide for them at the meeting, and that does take staff from the different departments getting together to get that information and get into the weeds a little bit and to be able to provide answers for them.
I would follow up with that, that the Creeks Committee have been excellent stewards of the Measure B money, and they were put in place to be those stewards. So I respect this memo and this request because these funds were designated for special purposes, and they watch it closely. The other part I would say is that it's especially important for the city to do this now with Measure C coming up. We have to show the transparency. They've asked for it as the Oversight Committee, is what they are. And I think the other departments need to step forward and be transparent, because it's a trust issue with these kinds of designated funds. So I would like our comments to go forward with that added to it, if it's that it just is especially important this year because of those reasons. We're setting up to spend $22 million of tax money that's been voted on by the public for the sole purpose of it, and we don't want to see it diverted. Measure B money was set up so it wouldn't be diverted. And I respect the Creeks Committee for every meeting they've had to make sure that didn't happen. And I sat through a couple of years of those, and I learned a lot. So I would support their memo and hope our comments go forward with it.
Yeah, I would as well. I'm curious to know. I kind of want to know the answers to these questions as well. So I hope that there is a feedback loop to where we can get some more information. And I guess, I don't know, in the past, have their comments been successful in changing any budget line items regarding this issue? Since you say it's happened quite a bit and I'm relatively new, I'm just curious, what's the track record?
Madam Chair, Commissioners, I think the answer to that is yes. There has been movement in this program over the years. I mean, the contribution for Measure B has gone up and down, and that's why I think some years you don't hear from them. You see, they're looking at the numbers and they feel comfortable with them, and they make a recommendation just to support the budget as proposed, or they make their changes and the budget moves forward. It's only in years where they see something that's concerning and they don't understand why that you see these. But it does change from year to year.
Okay, good to know.
And I think there does need to be a justification onto why all of these points were made. Somebody needs to come forward. It shouldn't be that hard to track the dollars. I know it's a little more complicated, but there's been issues before with citation monies, and I think it's fresh in everybody's mind still also, and so it would be good to have the answers. So I support Creeks.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, we bring this to you so that you can make comments and forward them to Council. So there are times where we've had commissioners, ask us to do something different with our budget, and we take that forward to council as well.
Yes.
So I want everybody up on the dais to realize that we are here for your input and discussion as to how we're proposing to spend funds and the services that we provide to the community with those funds.
And I think a $10,000 increase would be a great increase, but a $90,000 increase to a $100,000 budget is huge. So, thank you. Are there other questions or comments on the creeks? Please thank the committee for all their work, because the committee and staff, you do a wonderful job leveraging the money. And I think the success of the grants proves that, and I commend the citizens that voted in Measure B, because that gives us the ability to leverage those grants. We couldn't do it without that money, so it's a great asset.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, my name is Mark Sewell. I'm the Business Manager for Parks and Recreation. I'll be taking you through the FY19 General Fund and Gulf Fund budgets. Just to give you a brief overview, and for those who are watching this, the Parks and Recreation Department has the responsibility and care for a significant number of the city's assets. 1,800 acres of parkland, many sports facilities and buildings, and of course the beach. A number of sporting facilities that then provide recreational opportunities for a broad cross-section of the community. And 63,000 street trees and park trees and open space trees. Inside the Recreation Division, programs and services are there for the whole community, from young and old and those in between. And we have over 11,000 activity registrations annually, and more than 2,500 children served in after-school programs. And we also rent and provide the spaces for community events across the city in our parks, and we facilitate a lot of the special events that take place. We also partner with a lot of local agencies to provide over 10,000 households with weekly free meals and food distribution programs. And as Ms. Zachary mentioned in the sort of lead up to this, we very much appreciate the community getting involved and the significant investment in time that they provide us with their volunteer hours. It really helps us to deliver our services. So then, employed by the General Fund within the Parks and Recreation Department is recommended 81.25 FTE across the three divisions within the General Fund in Administration, Recreation and Parks. It's very similar to where we've been over the last couple of years. The only change there is a reduction of 2 FTE within the Parks division. And this really is just the final tidy up of the transfer of the former golf staff to the Parks division on an over-hire basis. All of those positions have now been absorbed into the original headcounts, and so therefore that 2 extra FTE is no longer required. Within our budget, as Ms. Zachary mentioned, in terms of the key initiatives and the highlights of our budget, we've got some significant cost increases that we have dealt with and are included in our recommended expense budget. As we all know, the drought has been very challenging for the city over the last 8 years, I suppose, I think it is. And with that has come a lot of conservation messages and requirements that we've met, and also the sources of water have got more and more expensive, and with the desalination plant. And what that's led to is significant increases in the cost of water, as we all have felt. And the Parks and Recreation Department is no different. It pays for its water in the same way that citizens will, albeit on different rates. But we've seen over the last couple of years 13% increases in some of our main uses of water. And so over the last 2 years, each year there's been a 13% increase, and so we factored that into our budget. And that has an impact of about $100,000 more a year from where we were when we were thinking this time last year about what our budgets would be. So within our services that we provide, we also provide some significant support for youth in our programs all the year round who require it to be able to be involved in a lot of our summer camps and after-school programming. We provide inclusion services so that we can offer our programs to a broad audience. And that service has increased significantly due to increased demand over the last 8 or 9 years, almost 500%. And so with regards to that, we're now recommending about $130,000 in hourly costs alone to facilitate the inclusion services for those youth who need it. And then, of course, as many other industries in California are being challenged, the minimum wage was having an impact in terms of the direct impact for those who are currently earning minimum wage. They're going to be earning a little more money. And of course, it then has a compaction issue to other pay grades and also costs and things like that going forward. We think at this time the impact to us is about $30,000, but we'll be evaluating that over the next few years when we think the impact of the minimum wage rising to $15 in the next couple of years will really bite. And we think that it's going to be far more significant to us in future years than $30,000 that we're projecting for fiscal year 19. Another key portion of our budget and how we've considered this is the renovation of the Cabrillo Pavilion. It is, of course, under renovation right now and is expected to be closed for the whole of FY19. And with that brings a reduced revenue. About $500,000 is typically what that building would have provided to the Parks and Recreation Department. We knew about that when we did the 2-year plan. This is just a confirmation and a reminder that our revenues are decreased around that sort of amount from where we would have typically expected to be if the building were open. And of course, we did and were able to factor in some expenditure savings for the direct costs of that building being closed, albeit we couldn't fully mitigate that in FY19. So you'll see later in one of the slides that there is actually a revenue line item of $128,000, which is a contribution from capital to kind of make us whole. So now into some numbers. The general fund expense budget that we are recommending is $16.7 million. And this chart here breaks that down across the different types of expense that we have. And you can see, if I hover over this column here, the change from the FY18 adopted budget, primarily in salary and benefits. And of this $225,000, about half of that is related to the retirement costs from the CalPERS formula. And then within the supplies and services is where we are projecting the water increases, and so therefore there's other minor savings and things like that elsewhere within that budget. So overall it's a $304,000, which is 1.8% increase from where we were adopting our budget last year. Here it is in terms of by the divisions, and you can see that the Parks and the Recreation Division are about the same size in terms of their costs at about 7.8 and 7.3 million. And again, the 1.8% across the department. When we look at the revenue, $5.2 million is how much we are recommending for the revenue for the general fund in fiscal 19. And you can see that it's quite a busy pie, but I wanted to just sort of break out some of the key sources of revenue for you. Recreational programming, just under $2 million is the revenue that we receive for summer camps, year-round programming, dance classes, all of those types of different things. Then one of the next biggest chunks we have here is the services that mainly the Parks Division provides to other city departments, like waterfront, to provide maintenance of the parking lots, and also to maintain street trees as part of the transfer from the UUT taxation. And then the last chunk I'll sort of pull out for you is that facility rentals really does have a big part to play in terms of how we can generate revenue at about 20% of the annual expectation. So here's our revenue by division, and you can see again the 5.2 million, of which 2/3 of it comes from recreation. That's the rentals and the programs, and then the Parks Division there for most of those intra-city service contracts for other departments. And the key changes here really, there's a $120,000 drop in parks. Really within that, the best way to explain that is that in FY18, there was a contribution from the Golf Fund to the Parks Division for those 2 employees who were over hire. Because we no longer have those employees, we no longer need that contribution from the Golf Fund. So that then shows as a reduction in revenue when you compare the 2 across the year. So when you remember that's 145,000, well, and there's only 120,000 shortfall, well, this actually means other things have grown and a little bit by $20,000. So it actually would be an increased revenue if you stripped that out. And then in recreation, you can see it's actually projecting to be 20,000 less next year. But you've got to remember again that the Cabrillo Pavilion is now closed for a full year. So again, that shows that there are some other areas which we are projecting to see grow in terms of their revenue performance. So kind of the key highlights of what exists within the park's revenue is the waterfront parking lot. I've mentioned that. The maintenance of the Sheffield open space, the UUT for the street trees and medians. That's about $1 million of the 1.4 million. That's the key part of that. We do maintain security services for the school district, and we get a modest amount of income for tree removal application fees. Within recreation, facility rentals, 20% of our annual requirement for revenue. Our youth activities program is large with all the summer camp offerings and year-round after-school programming. Our aquatics is a large program as well with the swimming pool. Slightly impacted in fiscal year 19 with the closure of the bathhouse, but the majority of the revenue is still protected from the swimming pool. Sports and tennis has been seeing a little bit of growth over the last couple of years. It's been really exciting to see tennis revenues grow double-digit over the last couple of years, 10% or more each year. Our active adults, as Ms. Zachary mentioned, we're looking to provide more opportunity for our active adults in terms of Career Recreation Centre and also free use in some of our park capital we're looking to use. And then in neighbourhood outreach services, we provide a lot of programs there for youth apprentices. We provide spaces for non-profits to lease in some of our locations. And we also then provide party spaces, which again, I'm pleased to say we're projecting more growth for those facilities for local residents to enjoy themselves. So within the recreation division, as I mentioned, there's a number of areas where we provide services and programs for a fee. And I can mention to you that there are 613 different fees and charges going into fiscal year 19. And we're proposing that just over half of them are going not to change. And then just under half of them, we're proposing some increases. And we're going to delete 27 because those programs or services are no longer offered or required. And when we make those recommendations, we're always thinking about, okay, how do we try to maximize participation? Where's the community need? What's the competition doing? We're not working in a vacuum. We can't just go and say, today we're going to charge this for that. There's always going to be that tension that we try to make sure that we're accessible, but we need to cover our costs, of course, and make sure that we're able to be sustainable. The next slide just pulls out a few of those fees that we're proposing to change. And so you can see there that we're proposing a 4% increase for our Chase Farm Park Centre rental. That's actually shown a little bit of growth again. So we hope that shouldn't be too impactful in terms of the ability to sell that building to people who want to use it for us. Summer camp programming, we look at this and we don't just apply the same percentage for every program. We look at each one individually and see what's needed, and we talk with our contractors who provide them, and we make recommendations for fee adjustments on those. The Mackenzie Centre, again, we're looking to increase that. That's been recently renovated and looks really wonderful and nice, and we think that that's sustainable and fair. A 3% annual increase for our non-profit lease rates, 4% for our rental sites. We're looking to recover the increased certification costs and wage costs in our lifeguard services on the beach. And of course, we're introducing a new fee for the Carousel House. We hope to be very popular with the community. This year as well, we've looked at our performance measures. I'll hand over to Rich Hanna, the Assistant Parks and Recreation Director, who's been the project lead with regards to that, and he'll take you through the next couple of slides.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Good afternoon, Chair Longstreet and Commissioners. There was a significant work initiative this year launched through the City Administrator's Office to really go back and look at our performance measures, which tie to our budget in so many different areas. And it was the first time in over a decade that we had the ability to go in and look at some substantial changes. I would add that as a department, every year we always looked at our performance measures, and we would increase numbers, look at workloads and those types of things. But oftentimes we would miss things like key initiatives and things that were changing and things that really speak to the health of the department. So this process allowed us to step back, identify healthy vitals. If you follow any of the presentations to the council when the budget was rolled out, we talked a lot about vital signs. For us, that really means what makes our programs and services successful, and also how do we communicate the role the department plays in providing programs, services, project renovations for the community. Essentially, how do we meet our mission in doing those things? And so I've got some examples up here, but some of the biggest changes you'll see in our performance measures this year moving forward is we did go in and consolidate and realign a lot of our program measures. We had similar measures in different sections, especially in recreation as it related to customer satisfaction, number of youth served. We really kind of went in and consolidated those numbers into the recreation management performance measures. We looked at projects. We wanted to make sure projects had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if it was a project that we did every year, we just moved that into our program activities. It's sort of the things that we do every year. They're not special projects that meet those characteristics. One of the biggest changes for the Recreation Division is we've looked at changing from static numbers to measure performance, or the number of youth served, to using a percentage method. And both numbers are important, and we use both of those to communicate, increases in revenue, increases in expenditures. You hear us talk about numbers, but what we wanted to do is look at a percentage of program capacity for recreation programs and activities. And that does two things. One, it gives us some flexibility for things that we don't control. So things like funding, things like weather, other disasters that may impact our ability to provide 10 classes. We might only provide 5 in a given year. And in that given year, we still may achieve 75% program capacity. We're just offering less classes for things that we don't control. So I look at it as those types of things in terms of influences we don't have. Some numbers we did want to keep permanent, and I'll get to that after the scholarships, but we wanted to measure the number of scholarships, camp and swim lesson scholarships we provide. We provide over 117 coming this year in 2018, and that's a combination of general fund provided scholarships, and we have a partnership with the Audacious Foundation. And so they provide a lot of our scholarships for aquatic-based, either swimming lessons, any camp or activity that has a water component. They've stepped up and funded those scholarships. We really wanted to pull out the amount of senior programming that we conduct at the Louise Lowry Davis Center. So we are putting a firm number in there, and that number lives inside of the active adults section because that's the program that's going to be delivering those services. And then the other thing that we pulled out is this: achieve a number of paid event rentals over 6 hours. And why is this important? Well, we started looking at the percentages here, and for a facility that could be open from 6 a.m. in the morning till 10 p.m. at night, how do you come up with an occupancy rate in terms of what would be successful? What we wanted to drill down with is these events that occur over 6 hours. They're the lifeblood that really subsidize these programs that are either low cost or community services that we provide. So we wanted to call that out in terms of how we're going to measure that as it relates to these 6-hour rentals. Moving on, some of the things that are the lifeblood of what we do, the mission, they speak to those, and we wanted to call them out. So we really wanted to address park safety and playground safety. How fast do we respond to these types of things in the community that sometimes get lost unless we're coming to the commission with a presentation on, a new playground installation. We wanted to address the drought and our lack of tree planting since the drought has taken place as part of our drought reduction strategy. We think it's time to come back and address that. And so we've included in this year's performance measures an initiative by the Forestry Division to come in and plant 225 trees this year. I would add that the water that we use to plant these street trees is negligible in terms of the numbers that Mr. Sewell was explaining to you in terms of drought and our water increase costs. And we also have outside funding to actually pay for those trees and help us with the installation. And then another thing that we just wanted to call out is there's a lot of things that go on in parts of Santa Barbara that we don't call out and we don't speak to. And an area like the waterfront, especially between Milpa Street and Shoreline Park, it's an active area for recreation. There's hoteliers, there's tourists, there's visitors, there's community members. And I think it can be lost at times on how much work we spend down there keeping that area as nice as we can. And we wanted to call that and actually measure that. And this allows us to inspect those areas, clean them, deal with graffiti, trash, litter, anything in those areas. And so we really tried to pull out key things that speak to our mission. So how will we use this data? Well, we'll use this to measure our effectiveness of programs and services. We'll use it to identify trends or challenges for either current or future action. we'll be able to correlate performance with financial resources. And I think Mr. Sewell was talking a little bit about the inclusion program and how much it's grown. Well, we'll be tracking the number of inclusion participants going forward. We've always done that, but we'll now know as those numbers go up, it will influence how much money that we will be spending to support those services within the department. It allows us to evaluate and articulate the breadth of our programs and services, again, speak to the mission. And finally, it allows us to report to the commission, maybe more than just in budget, kind of how we're doing on these key milestones and these performance measures. And so these are just a handful of the numerous performance measures we have within inside of the general fund, both in the parks and recreation divisions. And hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of the process that we've gone through and why we're pulling it out specifically to address at this budget presentation. And at this point, I'll turn it back to Mr. Sewell.
Since we're on performance, I have a couple questions. And since this is new, and I went through when the P3s first came out and recall it being a difficult time. And now it's all changed up. Can we review this in 6 months, I think, or sometime, to kind of put numbers with it to make sure we see? I think it would be educational for the commission to know what's going on and help us.
Chair Longstreet and commissioners, we'd be happy to come back to you at mid-year in fiscal year 19. We do a mid-year report for the city administrator. Once upon a time, we did the reports quarterly, which was a bit of an administrative challenge when you're actually trying to do your programs. But we maintain that information, so it's easy to report out. So we would be coming to you probably in February of 2019, because it's due in January, and we get everything together and be happy to review the progress of our performance measures at that time. We'd also be happy to review at that time the results of FY18, because part of it is looking at what we achieved in the last year and where are we now this year, or in the current year.
And a suggestion that I would have would be maybe to divide up parks and recreation to different nights so that we're not overwhelmed with the stats and we can really focus on the different divisions and what's going on inside of them. And I think it's just educational for us to know and helps us to advocate where we want to advocate for more support for this department. Thank you. Other P3 kind of questions? Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
well, I'm sorry, I'll just make one comment on, it seems like an immense amount of work that was done to put into these percentages and these hours and how much. I'm blown away by how much work product is being performed and measured and outcomes. It's pretty amazing. So I would second though what BB said, is we would love to make these performance goals, achievable at the same time. I think it's important to look back at your outcomes and really and analyze what you can do, with, like you're saying, the capacity of staff and hours and budgets and all of that. Because it's great to make these great goals, but then if they're not achievable, nobody feels good about that. So that would be my sort of comment, to balance what can be done with what's, going to be excellent, sort of thing.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Martinez-Cohen, I would agree with you. And I think we do weigh in, resources and what is achievable. I also would add that we don't want to have things in there that aren't challenging us to push boundaries and reach for greater, success within inside the department. Mm-hmm. But we also have to be realistic with that. And I think the staff within inside the department do a good job of balancing those two components. So we'd be happy to come back and make those two reports at different times to the commission sometime in February.
Okay. Ms. McGill?
Yeah, I mean, it's really more of the same. I come from a world where I lived and died by performance measures, know them very well. If we are going to have an opportunity to get more in depth of them with them, and I don't get the sense that tonight is that night, and it'd be great to split it up so that we can ask some meatier questions, really around how do you achieve
how do you come up with an 80% or greater as being your target? How are you engaging the community, understanding what's important in developing these goals, and how are you using these goals to guide, coach the staff, and really adjust and adapt your own programs? I mean, it's kind of what gets measured and gets done. So this kind of work is critical, and I'm very curious to know more. And tonight's obviously not the night. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so this is the final slide for this part of the presentation. Just to let you know, we mentioned that we receive a good support from other sources of funds, and within miscellaneous grant fund, we are recommending $471,000. They cover a broad breadth of things that we do within our department, from recreational programs to parks improvements, and you can just see some of them called out there. And then we're going to jump now to the capital. And Ms. Zachary.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, we're going to do this one, then go back to golf, and hopefully if you have questions about general fund, I want to talk a little bit about our capital program proposal for next year. You received a pretty detailed report from staff last month about where we are. We have a lot of different things, projects that are in the mix, and when we put together, I can guarantee, if you look at our original request list, it's quite a bit longer than what's ultimately being recommended to council. When we sit down and look at capital as a city organization, all the departments get together and look at the capital for the general fund. And so it gets shared around. There are times when we get more money, there's times when we get less money. And our focus when we put together the request each year is, what are we currently working on that we know will continue into the next year? What are we working on that we've now determined will cost more money and we'll need additional funds to make it successful? And what do we want to be working on in the next year to queue us up for the following year? So you always see that we have this progression of projects that are going on. We currently have projects under construction that are for the most part funded. We have a number of projects that are in design and going through the building permit process that we will be building next year, a number. We have some. And then we have some we just started, like the improvements to the Municipal Tennis Center, that are this year and will wrap up. So for next year, given everything that we currently have on our slate, we're requesting and proposing 4 projects receive additional funds. So no new project next year, but really ongoing funding for existing projects. They include our favorite Franceschi House and park renovation. The Commission's recommendations went to Council. Council agreed with your recommendations and also asked us to look more broadly at the master plan for the park, not just focus entirely on the house. And so what we've asked for to support, we have about $200,000 in our capital right now that will be used to hire an architecture engineering firm to come up with the concepts of the interpretive pavilion. We need some amount of money to redo the master plan and look at the broader park. And then we'll have to go through environmental review with whatever plan we come up with. The recommendation here for this funding will hopefully fully fund us all the way through, at least getting through design review and environmental review. That's it. Then we have to figure out construction later. Ortega Park master plan and renovation, we'll be taking to council next week. Recommendation to hire a park planning firm to do the master plan for Ortega. We have $75,000 in the budget this year. We're taking advantage of some other funds to fully fund that master plan. These funds will help us move it from planning to actually concept design. And the idea being that Ortega Park is one of those areas where we want to keep moving that project forward, not just create a master plan and throw it on the shelf. The idea is that we'll have a master plan, which the Commission will get to participate in by the end of this calendar year. These funds will allow us then take that master plan into some concept plan design development, these funds, if they're approved. And then our off-leash area, fenced off-leash area in Mackenzie Park, Now that we're done all the design and we're basically through permitting and we figured out accessibility and faced some issues with demolishing a building that had asbestos in it, we need another $135,000 to completely build that project. These funds, in addition to the funds we currently have in hand, means we can go out to construction in the summer and have it done in the fall. So that's the recommendation. And then lastly, the West Beach Splash Playground, that's our lovely wading pool that doesn't have water in it right now. We do have some funds, and recently the SWA contract went forward. We realized as part of that we need to look at some architectural details, such as we may need a standalone restroom. Our budget for last year didn't have enough money to do that. We're asking for a little bit more money so that we can add in that architectural element next year, with the idea, once again, by the end of the next fiscal year or when we start looking at capital, we'll know what is this project really going to be and what kind of funds do we need to go from design to construction. So that rounds it out to about $710,000 for capital for next year that we're requesting. I think that concludes our remarks on general fund. We can take questions or jump right into the Gulf Fund. And
Let's take some questions if there were any on the general fund. Anybody have any?
Just kind of, I'm going to say a historical, or maybe trying to be clairvoyant here. What's your track record in percentage achievement for these kinds of funding requests? And given that, kind of what are your priorities for what happens if your track record isn't 100%?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner McGill, you're absolutely correct. This is our first budget hearing. We do have our budget hearing at City Council on Monday, May 14th. And so Council will be considering our recommendations along with other departments, and then looking at any other things that they may consider. To be honest, it depends on the year. The strategy that we've had in Parks and Recreation for the last decade has been to advocate for and request funds to get our projects ready to fund, so that as opportunities for funding from various sources come forward, we've made enough progress. So that's often what we focus on when we go to council. And then also when we realize we have considerations that we really want this off-leash dog area, but when it comes to actually building something like that, costs go up. We try to be strategic in what we present. As for how council will consider this, all 4 of these are projects council's already approved us moving forward with, so it's not like we're coming up with yet another thing to do, which is part of our strategy, but also it's realistic. There's only so much we can take on, and in fact our plate is plenty full right now. So I don't know really how else to answer that. It's our hope these move forward, because these are key areas that either we want to get through design so we know what it'll cost, or complete construction and answer some questions. Ortega Park, as an example, has been at the forefront of the community's mind for a number of years due to some pretty significant park misuse issues that we have there, some very old and tired infrastructure that needs to be redone. And the concept behind a master plan is it's step back. It's not just sort of fix one thing and then fix another thing and then fix another thing. It's like, what should we really be doing here for the next 30 years? The neighborhood's changed as well since everything was sort of added or whatever. So that's why we propose to really invest in that. We certainly look for the Commission's support as we move forward.
Mr. Lesner-Buxton?
Yes, thank you. I don't see the Davis Center on Hill, and I know we talked a lot about renovating the Davis Center. That's in 2019 and beyond. Could you give an update on that?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Lesner-Buxton, you're correct. What we're showing here is is a recommendation for a general fund allocation. So that's just out of the city's general fund revenue sources. We have been, and the commission also participated in discussion about Measure C funds. And as part of the voter approval of Measure C, it did include enhancing parks and recreation facilities. Clearly the priority being streets. And then there's also the desire to build a new police station. But we're on the list as well. We're hopeful that that discussion can happen for the Davis Center when council considers Measure C allocations, because it really is a significant reinvestment in a facility. So I can't really put it up here because it's not something that's been fully formulated, but the idea is that's a premier facility that could be eligible for Measure C funds if council were to move that forward.
Thank you. And so just for clarification, what you're showing here tonight does not take Measure C money into effect?
If I understand what you're suggesting, you want to include the desire to make recommendations.
No, I'm saying these budgets are done on the assumption that no Measure C money has been identified yet.
Oh, right. Yes. Well, hopefully in future years we'll be able to do that. That helps answer your question. We're in an interesting place where it just passed, and I think there's a lot of decisions that council will want to make. And as we move forward, once they sort of approve a general Measure C plan, that will become more apparent.
Well, and to clarify, Measure C would take effect in what year? 2020?
No, it started now.
Now.
It started
Okay, I think
in
that's what
April
his
1st.
clarification was, is that this list doesn't include projects that would be funded by Measure C. That's what he was trying to clarify, I believe.
Right.
Yeah. And it doesn't. So because we don't have any of those allocations yet is sort of why it's not in here, correct? Okay.
There's a projection for money, but they have not yet established an oversight committee. And I think whatever happens will go through an oversight committee. So I think that the expenditure of those funds, the needs have been identified, but not necessarily project timelines or definite projects. So, yeah, okay. Moving forward. Do we have other questions? No? Okay, moving on to golf then.
Okay, Golf Fund. So, just to give you a reminder that the Golf Fund is an enterprise fund, which means it does not receive any taxation at all from the general fund, no general fund support. And the mission for the Golf Fund it's dedicated to providing residents and visitors an exceptional and affordable golfing experience in a friendly, inclusive environment for socializing and enjoying nature. So the consideration and the key highlights for the creation and the recommendation of the 2019 Golf Fund budget is to consider three prongs of the financial strategy to make sure that our pricing is there to provide great value for money, to enable the Golf Fund to rebuild reserves, and to ensure that the golf club continues to invest in capital and maintaining its assets. And the recommended budget achieves this, and the operation at the golf course is ultimately achieving this by offering excellent customer service and continuous improvements on the golf course itself, actually building and maintaining significant areas of the infrastructure at the golf course, and incrementally and only when needed, applying small price increases to make sure that the revenue can continue to cover those costs. So here's the sources of revenue for the Golf Fund. And I've got two charts. I'll speak to the pie chart and I'll speak to the line chart second. So the pie chart, you can see that the largest slice of the pie, 61%, is from greens fees. This is the fee paid for golfers to go out there and actually play on the golf course itself. The second largest pie is for those golfers who choose to purchase a golf cart to then play their golf. So over 3/4 of the revenue that's generated is from actual golf playing and riding in carts. And then there are some other areas in there which are reasonable sized revenue chunks of selling merchandise, people practicing on the driving range, offering lessons. And then you can see the dark green bar there is the revenue that the city receives as rent from the concession there of Mulligan's Cafe. And then the line chart across the side of that shows how has the greens fee revenue changed over the last 10 years. It is 60% of the total revenue. It's the most significant line item. And you can see it's been in a modest growth since fiscal year 10. That was driven by some construction when the Creeks projects were going in for the basins, and also the worldwide recession was biting in 2010. And since then, you see that the revenue has had a couple of years where it's gone up and a couple of years where it's gone down, but the overall average is for it to grow, and we're projecting a continuation of that within the fiscal year 19 budget. So the recommended revenue is split into three main categories. The revenue driven by golf operations, which as you can see is the most significant chunk, and we're projecting a 5% growth there over the fiscal year 18 budget. The concession revenue, which we think is going to be pretty flat, and then some other revenue, things like interest and things like that. So overall, an increase of 132,000, which is 5%, to a new revenue budget of 2.98 million. Fee changes. Typically, over the last few years, there's been an increase of about $1 to most of the greens fees, and we are proposing that for the first time in at least 10 years, I couldn't go back any further than 10 years to find out, a $1 fee increase for rental of a cart. There is a new cart fleet, should be with us any day now. For those golfers who've been suffering with the carts which have been conking out on the 16th or maybe even a little earlier, they'll be very pleased to hear that. But of course, as these things, as years go by, these things go up in cost and in price. And so we think it's fair for the first time in about 10 years to request $1 extra for those golfers who choose to take a golf cart with them when they play their round of golf. And in addition to that fee, we are looking to increase 18-hole rounds of golf by $1 also from January. Typically, the last few years, we've increased the greens fees in January, and we think we can achieve that again in January next year without putting off or disenfranchising too many golfers. We are still by far the best value golf in the local area for nearly all times of day and demographics. We are requesting no fee increases for junior rounds and no increases for 9 holes or twilight rounds for those golfers who have perhaps a little less time or just want to get out there a little later in the day. What I will say as well is special offers will continue, so golfers who have the flexibility to golf during the week at certain times, they can take advantage of some very, very good value discounts and prices and make sure they're on the email list to get the best prices available. The expense side, this shows how the expenses are derived by the different types of expenses, salary and benefits, supplies and services, etc. And you can see there that we're actually projecting a lower expense budget in fiscal year 19 than what was in fiscal year 18. And I'll explain why. Salaries and benefits are actually recommended to go up a little bit, 4.9%. There's only 0.35 FTE of city labour allocated to the Golf Fund. Okay, so that's what that represents. And then within the supplies and services line item, you can see it's by far the largest line item, recommended at 2.36 million. That's actually where all of the operating costs for the maintenance and the pro shop reside under the contract with Corsco. And so that's recommended to go up 167,000. That does not mean that we're recommending to pay Corsco 167,000 more. That means that we're actually reflecting the increased cost of water that we mentioned earlier in the general fund. The Golf Fund pays exactly the same rates, 13% increase over the last 2 years each year. And also, we're also allocating more of the budget to increase the amount spent on maintenance with fertilizers and sand and other maintenance practices so that we can continue to enhance the play and the playability for our golfers. And then the key reason, 2 key reasons why we're actually recommending a budget which is lower next year than this year in terms of expense is we no longer recommend the Golf Fund contribution because there are no longer those staff to transfer those costs over to the general fund for. Those positions are now eliminated and absorbed. And also, the debt payments are a lot lower. In fiscal year 17, at the end of fiscal year 17, the Gulf Fund paid off a significant chunk of debt, so therefore the debt liability is smaller ongoing. And so there, again, the expense budget is recommended at $2.805 million, with $255,000 transferred to capital to fund new capital projects. What would the impact of this be on the reserve? Well, we are anticipating that actually in fiscal year 18 we will be able to contribute $350,000 to the reserves, and FY19's budget contributes a further $200,000 to the reserves. So the Gulf Fund is standing to be in very good financial health from many years of struggling to make more revenue than expenses, and has been paying down a significant amount of debt. And so we hope, if all of our numbers are achieved and the budgets are hit, to have $566,000 as a projected reserve balance at the end of fiscal year 19. Now, that will still be below Council's policy for reserves for the Gulf Fund, which would roughly be about $800,000. So there's still a little way to go to build reserves to that point, but the financial strategy is to make sure that we get there over time and in a consistent manner, so that we don't just not reinvest in capital and all those types of things, because while we could achieve a number on a piece of paper, we would be potentially doing damage to the infrastructure of the golf course. So we believe that this recommended budget moves us more closer to achieving Council's direction for reserves. Within that capital, we have three main projects that we're looking to invest new monies into. So there's the golf course infrastructure renewal. These are the things like the on-course restrooms and some of the things that the golfers don't see, which is the maintenance buildings, making sure that those get some care and attention, because they are fundamental to the success of the golf course. We're continuing with the recommendation to fund the Players Improvement Fund with the dollar from every paid round. And we are also recommending that we need to purchase some new machinery. The last major purchase of machinery at the golf course was in 2013. So we're now getting towards 6 years without buying anything material to go out there and make sure we're maintaining the golf course, and these will be mowers and the like. Performance measures. Mr. Hanna mentioned at length about the process we've been through in the general fund, and it's the same in the Gulf Fund. Previously, a lot of the measures were very, very closely aligned to the fiscal performance of the Gulf Fund, and so therefore if you achieved your revenue goals, then all of your P3s would be achieved, and if you didn't achieve your revenue goals, all your P3s wouldn't be achieved. So we tried to broaden the scope and the reach of those. That said, the first one up here is to hopefully to grow some concession revenue, make sure that continues to deliver revenue to the Gulf Fund. Manage our potable water consumption. Just to remind you, or to inform those of you who aren't aware, over 90% of the water that's used at the golf course is recycled water. 10%, or just under 10%, is potable water. So from a drought perspective, that's the water that we need to be most concerned about conservation. Recycled water doesn't really have a drought impact, it has a fiscal impact. Recycled water has also gone up 13% each year for the last 2 years. And to increase the non-financial measures, we're looking at reporting and making more clear to people the customer service scores that are done every month. We have an outside agency that comes along and does a full audit and a full secret shopper for the golf course from start to finish, booking a tee time all the way through to having a meal. And we're looking to grow the number of preferred card holders, which we believe is an important program for us to attract and retain loyal golfing customers. And at their regular meeting on April the 11th, the Golf Advisory Committee recommended the approval of the operating budget, capital budget, and fees and charges for fiscal year 19. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
There are questions of Mr. Sewell. I have a question. Why has recycled water gone up 13%? Do you have any idea? I know this isn't your venue, but...
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, the price of recycled water is paired with the price of the lowest tier of potable water for irrigation customers. and it's 80% of the cost of the potable water price. That's how it's always used to be till about this time last year. And then I think a recommendation came through the board, I forget the name of
the Water Commission?
The Water Commission, to look at the recycled water rates, because the recycled water costs, the cost to produce a unit of recycled water was higher than the price that was being charged for a unit of recycled water. And so I think there was a strategic decision made to look to increase the pricing of recycled water to get to more of a cost recovery standpoint. So previously, I think it had been somewhat subsidized. So we were able to use as much recycled water as we could fiscally afford without any impact to the drought, really. Now that is becoming harder and harder, because the cost of the recycled water is now a more significant portion of our budget.
Isn't it going to be a waste if isn't that water just discharged if it's not used? And isn't that a waste?
Isn't it also related to the upgrades that they did to the recycled water plant? Wasn't there some capital improvement costs, and that's probably why they had to increase the price?
I'm afraid I'd only be speculating if I offered you an answer there.
Okay. There's some questions to go forward, because the water costs across the entire budget, starting at aquatics, and, is a huge piece of what we're facing right now. And I understand the water's gotten more expensive, but we have to somehow balance this out.
So, Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, Mark will correct me if I'm wrong, but if you look at our department as a whole, we spend close to $1 million a year in water. And we're very strategic in how we use water, as you can imagine. The drought certainly plays a role in it, but also why we need to use water. The use of recycled water has had advantages in that it has been less expensive. That's changing a little bit right now. When you look at our actual cost of water, also, I think, and again, I may be corrected slightly, about 30% of it's just the meter cost. So just as you imagine when you get your bill at home, you pay for the meter, you pay for your water, and you pay a discharge fee. So it all adds up. And as those fees increase, our need to use water may be flat. In fact, the cost has gone up, but we're maintaining at that 2013 level. So our water conservation goal remains the same, but we can't afford that much more. We did get a small increase in our general fund allocation this year to help deal with the cost of last year to 2018, and compounded with the new rates that'll go in 2019. But as we move forward, the department itself will be looking at its water costs, its labor costs as it relates to the increase in minimum wage, and then also, as you hear in the media, the cost of PERS. And in the next 2-year budget, anticipate that there'll be a lot more discussion about how we make decisions of how to spend the limited resources that we have, and also, all the more important, to try to leverage revenue where we can. And with the idea that we look to greater sources of revenue when there's a private party using a public space, whether it's an event facility, whether it's a concession agreement, versus the revenue we might get from leasing to a nonprofit, or the revenue we might get from providing a recreation program, which is where we look at, well, we want to make sure we're providing programs that are affordable. How do we offset that subsidy of those programs? Well, we look for other ways to generate the revenue, because it's not going to come from an increased allocation in the general fund. So those are the kinds of challenges we face when we put together the budget. we went over some slides that talked about the cost of our increases to inclusion services, which is really a very vital contribution to this community. We absorbed that cost. So we found ways in other aspects of the Recreation Division budget to allocate revenues from other programs to support that program. So we're constantly trying to look at if a cost is increasing over here and it's very important, what do we do differently somewhere else if there's no additional funding coming through the general fund process? And those are the decisions. It's hard to ferret through all those details with you in a situation like this, but we look at every program critically and try to figure out how do we maximize programs and services, minimize costs to our residents for recreation, and then find ways to fill that gap.
And if I may add to that in terms of the Gulf Fund, the impact of the price increase is going to be roughly $60,000 next year. So 60,000 rounds could be $1 a round. We don't just do that kind of simple math equation, but there are other golf courses very close to us who are charging drought surcharges. They've got a specific fee that the golfers pay. So, these costs are somewhat unavoidable, and so that goes into the hopper when we're trying to make our fee decisions and ultimately our recommended budget decisions to try to find the right balance and the right tension between pricing and maintenance and capital. And so,
Right. The impacts are great. I know in the 55 units that I manage, looking at 2016 and 2017, our city water bills, so including trash and everything, went up $6,000 on 55 units. And I know everybody's conserving. So the impacts, when I then magnify it to our department, and what concerns me is where we take those hits is in parks in our hourlies, because that's where you have some leeway, and they're the people that really fill in the gaps because of all the other things, can no longer afford full-time people. So we're getting precariously close to the way things felt in 2008 to me, and that concerns me. We can't charge our way out of this. We make our programs unaffordable, as you said. We make our parks unable to be rented, and so it's a concern that I would like passed on in our comments to the City Council, is that we have concerns on these increasing costs that we don't have any control over, and see that the general fund does need to allocate for that. I know we're down the ladder a little bit. We tend to be the first to take hits, and we've not ever recovered from some of those past hits, and that it feels like they're coming again. So it's a big concern to me. We hear about, we have citizens coming to us about tree diversity and all kinds of things like that, and that's important in this community. But we have to put our money where our mouth is. So.
Could you explain to me, and maybe I appreciate your concern, could you explain to me when we get to use our reserves and what our reserves are for?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Lesnar Buxton, yes, the city has policy reserves, and if I get the percentages right, it becomes it's essentially 25% of our operating budget, of which 15% is disaster reserves and 10% is economic reserves. I think that's how it's phrased, or it could be the other way around. That decision is made by the City Council. So if we were to propose, if the city administrator was to propose a budget that was out of balance, so in the red, so to speak, the decision would be up to the council as to whether to use reserves to balance that budget. And when we went through the economic downturn, there were times where we went below our reserve policy fairly significantly. It became a council priority a number of years ago to get back to where we met our reserves. As you can imagine, anytime your budget goes up, your reserve requirement goes up. So that's the other juggle that the finance department and the city administrator undertakes in putting together a budget. And at what point a reserve is used, I can say, obviously in this fiscal year, between the Thomas Fire and the mudslides in Montecito, the city has had an economic impact associated with that. It may be that reserves are required to get our ends by the end of this fiscal year. So we'll start out the year kind of slightly in the red. But the goal is always to present a budget that's balanced to the extent possible.
And we as a department have no reserves. It's only general fund reserves. We have no control over that. The golf has a reserve because it's an enterprise fund. Creeks have a reserve because they're enterprise. But we can't, Parks and Recreation can't tap into those reserve funds at all. Yeah.
And Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Lesner-Buxton, if I could also add, there is a reserve in the general fund, but it's usually quite small. And an example of when that reserve is used could be, for example, we went to council with our Cabrillo Ballpark project, and there were a number of recommendations on how to fund that project. And part of it included transferring monies from other projects, which is what we did, the grant funds, the existing funds, and then we also needed a little bit of reserve money, the city's general fund. And that's something that council makes a decision about.
Okay, another comment that, I don't know if it's actually a question, but a comment. When I'm looking at the total department budget, expenditures are right around 25 million and revenues are right around 12.9, almost 13 million. So the department as a whole is producing roughly 50% of its expenditures through its revenues. And the other 50% is being funded directly from the city's general fund, correct? And is that percentage, I know you have all these other performance goals that are very specific. Is that percentage, the 50%, revenue to expenditures, is that something that has increased or decreased over time?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Martinez-Cohen, if you take out golf and creeks, so creeks only the operating revenue is Measure B, and it's dedicated. Right. So it's kind of its own little world over there. Golf has to make sure that its revenues and its expenses balance, right, because it basically is an enterprise fund. When you look at the general fund portion of the department, which is Parks, Recreation, and Administration, over the last 20 years, so my tenure with the city is closing in on that, and with the department, a good portion of that, there's been an increasing demand on the department to generate more revenue. And as a department, we take our mission very seriously, which is to provide safe parks and vital recreation programs and services and community services, as you see from all the collaborations that we have. If we don't have enough general fund, just do it. We have to figure out how to generate that revenue. And so so when we've had, for example, and during the economic downturn, our general fund allocation was cut and cut and cut and cut. And at times we found ways to squeeze a little bit more revenue out of something to keep something alive. And other times we cut programs because we just couldn't do it. Or we lost staff because we had to eliminate staff positions. And so we pulled things out. The other thing so it's that balance. As far as other departments are concerned, it really depends on the department because we do have airport is an enterprise fund. The waterfront department's an enterprise fund. Water and wastewater are enterprise funds. Police and fire are not. So when you also look at the city's budget, 50% of the general fund allocation goes to police and fire. And so then there's Parks and Recreation and Library and City Attorney and City Administrator. And so all those pieces of the pie pull together. Some departments have no capacity to generate revenue.
Right.
So it really depends on how what you're looking at.
In the old days, no, there was no pressure to generate revenue, not like it is now. So, yeah, it's been a change. So as we move forward with this budget, and thank you, it's good to see the golf stable and moving forward. And I think it is. There were tough times, and it was some tough decisions, and they've turned out very well. So thank you to everybody who worked on that. But we need to make a recommendation to City Council about this budget, and with some comments, and I think you've captured some of our comments. Are there any other specific comments that jump out for people that you would like to go forward? We're pleased to see the capital programs moving forward. I think as a commission we believe in in maintaining our infrastructure and our programming. We're pleased that the staff has increased the inclusion programs and made that work. I would say that's very important. What other?
We appreciate the project objectives of P3.
The P3s, yes, and look forward to learning more about them. Have we missed anything that comes forward? Okay. Thank you. And I need to entertain a motion for recommendation of this budget to council.
I'll make a motion that the commission recommends City Council approval of the recommended fiscal year 2019 Parks and Recreation Department budget, including the General Fund, Creeks Fund, Golf Fund, Capital Program, and fees and charges schedule.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Any other discussion? I think we didn't say much about fees and charges, but in fact there weren't any major changes, so we appreciate that. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Thank you for all your hard work. We have no more business on this agenda, and I will adjourn the meeting.